Hello and welcome everybody. Web Assistant Parameters Demystified, our first Enable Now expert session for this year. I hope you had a good year so far. From now on, we're going to start on a regular basis again. Again, sorry for being a bit late this year with those sessions. However, let's, for the sake of GDPR, read our common disclaimer. This meeting is now being recorded. If you don't want your face, your name, your questions, your voice, or whatever personal being visible to others, please disconnect now. Okie dokie. Our agenda for today, we talk Web Assistant. We will not start with Adam and Eve, but a little at least. Giving you again a Web Assistant architecture overview. There are plenty of questions around which server is responsible for what still. So I added the slides again to the deck, and we're going to talk about this again, just to make sure that we are on the same page. Yeah, then we look at the data flows again. I will give you a proper outlook on the simplified integration approach that you most likely have heard about already. Yeah, so we are talking about configuring in mainly today, but I will give you an outlook on how to integrate, or how this is going to happen if we integrate Web Assistant into third-party applications, which is officially still not in the feature set, but unofficially it is. And it will become official with the next release. So it's soon, but we're going to have a dedicated session for the implementation where we're going to have Stefan and other top folks in the call as well. Yeah, so I'm not going to do that alone, but nevertheless, I'll give you an outlook after we clarified that we are on the same page regarding the architecture, because that's the very mandatory requirement for that purpose. And then we're going to come to the core topic, which is the configuration parameters and the tools to use to test and evaluate our configurations, since this is also something that comes repeatedly to our desks. Yeah, so to see how the console works, to see how the link generator works. For all of you who never have seen the link generator, I'm going to show you where it lives and why it is the most beautiful debugging and testing tool that we got right now, and others like the browser, F12 console, etc. And then we're going to have plenty of time for your questions. As always, please just unmute yourself in case you have a question whenever during the call and when it makes sense and it fits to the topic. So feel free to do so. I'm not blocking this within the meeting, but at the end, we're going to have at least an hour left to discuss and get a closer look to your questions. I will answer as good as I can. There might be areas that I will not be able to answer. In that case, I will take a note and get back to you via email or take that to the next call. If you all agree, let's get started. So, Web Assistant, the unknown alien. Closing you guys, putting you in the corner, and there we go. So we all know what Web Assistant is. Web Assistant is the web performance support delivery method of Enable Now, the overlay above a web application using JavaScript as a baseline technology to provide context, help guided towards embedded learning, and the what's new announcements within SAP standard web applications. That's basically it, and that's how far we all are, hopefully. Current integrations, status quo. We are well fit and fully enabled on the left-hand side, S/4HANA on-prem and cloud. That's our major case so far, and most likely US consultants will have done that configuration mostly. We are pretty much set in field glass. I will show you the field glass recognition in a second. Beautiful content there. SuccessFactors, Sales Cloud, Marketing Cloud, IBP with restrictions. At that point, first question to you. Have you ever struggled with IBP so far? Is there any active projects that you are within regarding IBP? So let's take this as a chance to talk about IBP a little if you have questions. Business One by design, Ariba, I'm going to show you as well. We're going to take a different approach here, but it looks good. Service Cloud and the other commerce and customer data cloud are under development. They will come soon. And in planning, we got mainly Concur, and I'm going to show you the first web assistant showcase for Concur as well. Subscription billing, I've never heard of that module, to be honest. Customer engagement center, okay, that's the ticketing solution, the new one. That will be available soon as well. And analytics cloud, there's work in progress already. So I believe this is basically just in the wrong column, but nevertheless, things will come. So this is our status quo. Coming back to IBP, Integrated Business Planning. Did anyone encounter any issues around IBP so far? Do you have any active IBP projects? Please let me know. No, that's good. No, that's not good. But however, IBP is mainly delivered on a Fiori Launchpad where we are fully integrated. On the it's living on the left column on the green side, so it's saying, okay, IBP is fully implemented. Please be aware of the following: IBP is a planning tool for sales planners and demand planners in larger enterprises, and they are usually using both front-end technologies, the Fiori Launchpad on the one hand, and most of them are using Excel and the IBP Excel plugin as a secondary technology to access this data and work with it. Be aware of that potential misunderstanding. Yeah? We are fully integrated into IBP, but for now only on the Fiori Launchpad side with Web Assistant. The Excel add-in that IBP provides, where most of the planners are actually working and where the adaptation comes from, is currently not supported by Desktop Assistant. Yeah? The fix is already implemented. So officially, we're going to have the Excel profile being IBP capable by next release. If you need it earlier, let me know, because the profile is already adapted and it's working. And you're going to be able to create, for instance, guided tours on IBP with Desktop Assistant, but you need to take the technological change and the technological transition between the Launchpad and the Excel view on the data into consideration. Yeah. So getting in and just stating for IBP we are fully available would be thought a little too short. Yeah? Simply because this module, this solution uses two different technologies which are technologically diametral from our perspective, and where we have to take the Web Assistant, Desktop Assistant handshake into consideration for first. So you need to take Desktop Assistant rollout and functionality into consideration when rolling out, including all the to-dos that come with that fact. And on the other side, people are looking for standard content, and there is standard content for the Fiori cockpits around IBP for sure, but there is no standard content for the Excel piece, so how to analyze, how to create a report in Excel, etc., which unfortunately is the main usage scenario for most of the planners in companies. So this could be some kind of a disappointment if you start the project. So please be offensive with those informations, just to make sure that we don't run into further trouble around IBP. That's the status quo. Any questions here?
Just in general,
so
this list is super important, because I'm mostly struggling when you start showing Web Assistant to a client and then you implement it and then they go showcasing around the company and look, we now have Web Assistant, and then all these questions come in. Oh, wow, does it is it also supported with this, and is it also supported with it, and can I use it with this? And then I'm like, well, then I'm looking around in the info center and in the Jam group and everywhere, and I'm trying to figure out if there's content and if it's integrated, and if I have to do it via URL or can do it via catalog. So it's a little bit of a mess. From my understanding, and then I always end up saying, okay, let's try.
Yeah.
Because I'm not
same for me.
Okay.
Yeah, it will be more transparent right now, because right now we have more capabilities in integrating. We are also using that integrating capabilities for further internal projects. But let's park this question or this issue for another, let's say, 20 minutes. Yeah, and then it's basically solved, I believe.
Cool.
Alrighty, so that's integration. If you run into trouble regarding IBP, drop me a personal message and we can talk about it. Let's proceed. Information sources. First of all of you should be registered to the newsletter. Yeah? The newsletter is accessible from a link to the internal info center, where you can subscribe to the Web Assistant release newsletter, and the release newsletter comes bi-weekly up to once every month, 4-weekly, depending on the release, which is an agile release cycle, so not predictable when there will be a release. And this is the most valuable information around what's in the release and what's in the current canary. I believe you know the difference between a canary and a factory release for web applications like ours. Yeah, so there's always the beta one, the release candidate, as it was called when we were still on premise, which we call the canary release now because of that little novel about the canary bird that was put into a cage and blah. Yeah, and if it dies, there's something wrong with the mine, you know. So this is why it's called canary. The canary release is described in here as well. So this is where you will have like a crystal ball looking into the next release already, and it's quite a no-brainer to implement it because you only have to change one URL to use the canary features for testing and try purposes even 2 weeks before the official release. Yeah. So subscribe to the newsletter. That's the URL. Let's open it quickly to see. I hope you all know about it already. If not, I'm going to put that in. Release information in internal info center, newsletter page. This is where we go. And this is where you please subscribe to the newsletter. Comes bi-weekly with some deep links to the what's new documentation for the current factory release and the outlook for the current canary release, including the testing links. So let's put that into the chat quickly to have it somewhere. There we go. And then let's proceed. So release information, same area, Info Center, the Roadmap Explorer, brand new Roadmap Explorer of SAP is deep linked here. I will send you at least that slide later on after the meeting that you have all the links. Roadmap is more high granular. It's not an item or feature level, but there is the official single source of truth regarding implementations. Yeah? So if a target like Concur right now is agreeing on implementing a web assistant and they have a communicatable target release from their perspective, the integration will show up in the roadmap. Yeah, so this is the first area to look at if we're talking about, okay, when will what be available and how? Yeah, look to the roadmap first. Training content, this link points to the internal version of SEN50. For all the externals where you don't have access to this internally hosted training content, please use your Learning Hub license and take Zen50 into consideration. Again, it was lately updated. If there is anything regarding how to author, I believe SEN50 is a good source of information. Info Center for sure. And then we got this node, which I'm going to open for you as well quickly. Don't know why it's not working. And then put you the link into the chat as well. This is a node that you should be aware of. Oh my God, my bandwidth is a beauty this morning. The limitations. And this is something, a node that is consequently maintained by the support guys. And this SAP node 23056663 comes with the hot list of all known, so far known limitations. Yeah, that's also something that you should be aware of. Let me copy that link for you and put it into the chat as well to have it. But again, I will send the the deck around as soon as possible. Yeah, so this most likely is only accessible from inside because we have another view to the portal, to the ticket portal. Yeah, but as soon as you know the number, it will be accessible from the outside in the same way because it's a published and active node, so it's accessible for anybody having a corresponding identity. So that's the information sources that you should be aware of. I believe most of you have been already. Just emphasizing on the fact that the newsletter really is a good buddy in terms of what's new and what's happening and what parameters, for instance, have been deactivated for what reason. So this is all in the newsletter, so please subscribe to it. So let's talk infrastructure, the favorite topic. And please, encouraging you again, unmute yourself and jump in anytime where something is unclear, because this is the absolute foundation to get further. We need to be really aware of the infrastructure and its limitations and its general idea. So high levelly, what is WebAssistant? WebAssistant is a JavaScript-based, let's call it a plugin, that lives inside the target application, but it's coming from a central point, which is the famous framework server. Yeah? WebAssistant.enablenow.cloud.sap. That's the orange box on the right-hand side. So the code that's behind the question mark button is always coming from that server and from nowhere else till now, since now we are able to host the complete framework more or less outside of our central internet accessible server. That's the use case for isolated networks. For instance, if you are working with a government party or with a company with high security standards, like oil companies, insurances, banks, defense, intelligence, police departments, stuff like that, they would not allow their servers to talk to the internet. So what we need here is being able to host our complete WebAssistant framework on the premises of the customer to avoid the server talking to the outside world, or the single browser talking to the outside world. So this is possible now. We come back to that in a second. Yeah, but for now, let's consider the framework server as that single source of truth for that JavaScript framework that lives somewhere outside, period. As soon as this is accessible, the functionality as such is going to implement, which is symbolized by the question mark circle button in the shell of the target applications in most of the cases. So this is the general prerequisite, and this is where everything comes from. And then we got content sources. We have a standard content source, which is the famous UACP. Let's talk about UACP in a second as well. Or an SEN, an Enable Now Manager as a content server for standard content. There are parts of the target applications using the one solution, others are using the other. There's not that much of a difference from our perspective, but we come to that detail in a second. And then we have, and that's where we as Enable Now consultants are actually starting to come into the play, custom content, customer-owned content and customer-maintained content, which is an Enable Now instance, which is independent from the standard content and lives probably somewhere else. There could be a mixture between on-premise versus cloud. If the customer hosts, let's say, the Enable Now server on-premise, but the standard content is coming from the internet, from the cloud. So there is where all the question marks usually come from. But effectively, the custom content comes from the Enable Now Manager instance owned by the customer. And both come into the famous content mixer, which is essential part of the WebAssistant framework of that WebAssistant. And that content mixer gets the catalog requests from both sources. What content do we have in standard in the particular context? And what content do we have on the customer's side in the particular context? The content mixer decides smartly what to display. And then we have our result list. And that's the same procedure for basically all of the content types that are involved. Help content and learning content are more or less acting in the same way. So that's the baseline. Let's proceed. Going a bit more precise. How is that access flow actually working? What I skipped in that slide is the target application. Yeah, so there is another server involved, which is the target, which could be then an S4HANA tenant, which could be a SuccessFactors tenant, which could be a field glass tenant. Whatever. The target application is our number 2, and sends something. But let's start with 1. So as I mentioned earlier, the first step that happens, the initialization file, the famous init file, we're going to talk a lot about that thing today, is going to be provided by the target, and the help framework is loaded by the target application from that central web server and within the browser of the end user. Okay, so that's the first thing that happens. And the initialization triggers the download of the web assistant factory release from a central location. This is the first thing that happens. That central location, again, might be, since now, even an on-premise location, if we host the web assistant server on-premise, but in 90% of all the cases, it's a remote source, which is our factory server. As a second, the meta information is sent or requested by the framework and sent by the target application. That's the black box in 2, because it's slightly different from application to application. However, it's sending the application name, the application version, the currently applied user interface language. Based on that, Web Assistant is going to filter content and the context information, for instance, the page ID. And this is also, this pack of information is sent to the Web Assistant to make the content mixer decide which contents to display in what manner. So based on the
quick question.
Yeah, sure.
Assuming it's S4HANA and we have configured the catalog with these parameters like version and application name, and language obviously is the profile, what the user was logged into. So is the transferred context information the one that we have configured in the catalog, so the version that we have configured in the catalog, or is that the version of the S4HANA?
The version of the S4HANA is taken into consideration unless you configured it in the catalog. And if you configured it in the catalog, you did that for purpose, and then you override the actual version with one that you have configured. And the configuration capabilities within the catalog are mainly used for latest.
So I do not have to configure version if I'm always...
At least not for S4HANA Cloud. And I'm not 100% sure for S4HANA on-prem, because they are working slightly different in some cases. But usually that's the procedure. The application knows its version. And if you maintain it, you say, I'm fixing it for whatever purpose. And if you fix it, and that was our workaround before latest was implemented, to say, we stay on 1.1.1.1. We always keep that version. And then for custom content only scenarios, that was maintenance free, always somehow predicting that content and UIs will still match after upgrades. But basically, that is a dynamic information coming from the target, but that's again target application specific. Some applications know that term. S4HANA knows it has a version. For instance, in SuccessFactors, it's still version 18.05. And it's hard-coded somewhere. That depends on the target. But if you want to influence it, you put it into the catalog request as a parameter, and parameter will always win. So that's the hierarchy. If it's dynamic, it's coming from the application. If you configure it in the configuration form, not necessarily in a catalog, it could be any. In S4, it's different. In field class, it's different. However, that wins over the dynamic one. And if you want to really force it, you put it into the URL, and the URL wins over the static. So it's dynamic, static, URL, and URL always wins. And then there is even one layer above that I'm going to show you later, where you can change certain parameters using the console and directly do it in JavaScript to hack it. And so it's 4 layers. Let me just take notes. That's a good slide. I will paint that slide for you, because that makes sense to understand. The 4 layers of relevancy for the single parameters and where the sources are. That's a good one.
It's like our light bulb on off default fallback parameters.
Yep. Yeah, stuff like that. Yeah, but it's always a hierarchy of winning. Yeah, and the URL always wins, but that will be our tool for now anyway. So we're going to see that in a second.
And the application name does have to be exactly like the name. Like if it's an on-premise, it does have to be exactly written, uppercase, lowercase, underscores, how it's put into the application.
It's a question of standard content or content as such. If you override the application name, you call your S4HANA instance Peter because you like that name. Okay, let's call it Peter. And if you have a standard content only scenario and you tag your application with Peter and you create content for Peter, it's fine, right? If standard content comes from a public source, which in most of the cases is what the customers are looking for, the 2 3s on the left-hand side, those servers will not know an application called Peter, so it won't be displayed. That's basically it. It's just a bloody string. And for whatever purpose you want to use it, use it. As soon as it is dynamic and your application is called S4HANA Cloud and you call it Peter, for sure there will be no match anymore already on the first level. But basically it's just a string.
And I've read in the Web Assistant newsletter, I think in this or the previous version, there was a fix that you could now edit Web Assistant even if the version was not the same as of the application. So
latest. Yeah, that's the latest scenario. We're going to talk about latest later.
Okay.
Yeah, latest. The application now sends not only the version and it anticipates latest, it sends latest bracket version. Yeah, and then you know, okay, that version is the latest. And if you configured your content with latest, you will see it and then you will be able to maintain it.
Do you talk about that later? I just don't
Yes,
get it.
absolutely. Yeah, the latest is simple. It's just a string as well. Yeah, and there was so many rumors about that, and the brilliant logic behind. Basically, there's not that much, but let's talk about it later. Yeah, it will be clear at the end for sure.
Okay.
All right, and then we got the content boxes on the left, standard content, the greenish ones that come next. Provide their content and provide the meta information as well. Mixer will take all this into consideration, mixes standard and custom content accordingly, and the corresponding content is going to be sent to the customer. And as soon as the application context changes, which again triggers a certain functionality of the Web Assistant framework, the page toggle functionality, would trigger the next query. It will request a new set of meta information. You come from page 1 to page 2. Page 2 meta information is sent, and the whole story starts from scratch again. We're going to see that basic flow in the console in a second. I will use our link generator for that purpose because that's the most simple application that we got, and it's clearly visible there because there is not that much overhead from the application itself. But that's what we talk, right? So we got basically 5 servers involved. On that picture is 4. It's the customer's Enable Now manager, is the Web Assist factory server, or one of the servers. Next slide. And the 2 content sources, one for the in-app help content, partly UACP, partly Enable Now, depending on the decision of the target. This is something that is target application team decision specific, and the standard learning content server, which is always an Enable Now manager, where our standard simulations and standard book pages come from. And this all is mixed and presented. So far, so good. Let's talk about scenarios. The default content scenario, this is the moment where no Enable Now license is yet needed. That's only the standard content shipped together with the target application. So we have the in-app help content server, UACP in most of the cases, and the learning content server, the Enable Now manager, starting with education as content sources. And we have the same framework, but there is no blind spot in the middle, no Enable Now server that is owned by the customer involved. So there is no need to configure something. This is the standard scenario, but still we have 3 servers to somehow allow list. So we need to make the end users notebook or end users PC enable to access those servers in any condition. Yeah, that's always something that you might be asked. No? Is there a kind of a allow listing necessary? Yes, yeah? Those 3 URLs need to be restrictionless accessible from any machine of the customer's ecosystem. Coming back, oops, that was one too fast. Default extended content scenario. The extended content scenario takes a customer instance into consideration. And there are 2 different approaches again. One is the default content. The default content still comes from the in-app help content server. Again, UACP in most of the cases. Jumping into the content mixer, the default content, the default learning content, as you all know, is something that has to be connected and extended within the customer's Enable Now tenant. So we mirror the complete relevant content from the default content server into the Enable Now customer tenant. And then we create a so-called extended work area on top of that. Yeah, so there is no direct connection between the learning content server and the mixer anymore. This is passed through the customer instance. That's one of the biggest question marks still that we got. What's the story behind this? I believe this picture explains it pretty well. And then the mirror plus the overlay of the mirror, the extension that gives the delta, that deactivates certain things, that changes certain standard content items in case necessary, is injected into the content mixer. And the content mixer mixes then effectively 2 sources, while one source mirrors the third one. All right. And that's what we call the extended content scenario. And most likely, this is the one that you will face with, deal with the most often. Framework server is still the same. The custom content scenario, again, is pretty simple in comparison because there's only one server involved. There's no standard content. The customer decides to use Web Assistant for, let's say, a homegrown Fiori Launchpad, a homegrown cockpit that consolidates certain homegrown apps for whatever purpose. In that case, we have to configure that particular Launchpad for custom content only, which means there is only one server involved, which is the customer tenant of Enable Now, and all the contents, learning and in-app help content, are exclusively delivered from that particular URL. Could be on-prem, could be cloud, depending on the scenario. Still, the framework is the same. Okay. So canary versus factory. So once every 2 to 4 weeks, as I mentioned, there is a new release where the current canary becomes the factory deployment, under the prerequisite for sure, that there was no issue, bug, or whatever dysfunctionality found during that period of time. And a new canary deployment is released. That's the trigger for the newsletter. The newsletter is released and you will receive the information what's new in the new canary. The canary what's new, if no changes applied, are copied to the factory deployment what's new, and this is the one that at that moment in time will be updated for the customer implementations using the central Intranet-based framework source as well, with 0 downtime. So it just happens, right? And if there was no test in between, and which never happened so far, the factory release created some kind of a dependency to the configuration, and something doesn't work anymore afterwards, it will just not work anymore, right? So looking to the canary from time to time makes total sense. However, that's probably a question mark in your heads. How do we get access to the canary? And canary release, so the current beta release, is coming from the same server basically, but using another URL prefix. So the only thing that you would have to do is change webassistant.enablenowcloud SAP to webassistant-outlook enable now cloud sub. So preview was used already, so they had to find another word. So it's Outlook then, not preview, because preview is the actual suffix of the preview releases for the Enable Now tenants as such. So you just have to know the little trick. It's Outlook, and I have a spelling typo here. I'm gonna change that immediately. because it's not Outlook. For sure, it's Outlook. Come on, Outlook. So switching from factory to canary is adding -outlook to the web assistance address, and in most of the applications, that's just the configuration form where you add this temporarily tested or overriding the source with the corresponding parameter, but parameter will be our major topic today anyway. So let's see later how that works if you don't know yet. But that's the way. Okie dokie. So where are those web assistants come from? I told you so far that it's always one instance, and that was the one that was known so far, web assistant .enable now.cloud.sub, the next typo I just found, which is actually the Europe tenant. Yeah, so this is coming from St. Leon Roth. This is hosted in Roth. For any other where we could experience certain latencies, which is a bit of a pain. Yeah, because if you are somewhere in China and you download your framework from St. Leon Roth in Germany, it has to pass the Great Wall of China, which means it takes a while. And if it's not properly configured, the initialization of the web assistant framework slows down the initialization of the target application as such, if that is using kind of a bootstrap technology and saying, I'm loading everything I need from A to Z before I'm fully accessible. Yeah, and if this is a request to that only Europe server, webassistant.enable-now.cloud.sap, coming with a certain latency, the complete initialization time of the target application will suffer based on that. Yeah, because we are getting content from somewhere. So if you face that, know about the other guys. Web Assistant is hosted on US2 as well, on APJ as well, which is the Sydney data center, the Chinese data center, Canada as well, Russia on RU1, in Brazil on the Latin American server, and one exclusive one for the Southeast Asian area coming from Japan. Okay, so you know those, they are documented as well for all of you not having known that. That's how it works.
A little question.
Yes.
This would be then the URL we configure in the, for example, web dispatcher. And if it's a Japanese system, we have a Japanese web dispatcher,
Voila.
and then it
Exactly.
routes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's basically the reason why, even since this release, we don't need web dispatcher as a reverse proxy technology anymore, mandatorily. Yeah, good news. For multinational implementations, you would still use it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because then you have the chance to filter the source IP address to a certain location, or map the source IP address to a certain location, and then get your web assistant from the nearest one. Yeah, that's one of the benefits of that thing, being a proxy. To be honest, if you now ask how is that working, I have no clue. Yeah, because I'm not a network administrator. I know that it works, but I don't know how. Yeah, that's a couple of lines of mapping code in web dispatcher, and that shouldn't be our duty, to be honest. That's something that we just announce, saying, okay, do it, but find somebody who does it, because we don't do that. I don't even know, but yes, it's possible. And if there's no web dispatcher, this is a one-to-one relationship. If you only have your one tenant, SuccessFactors, and SuccessFactors says, okay, my headquarter is in Europe, and in SuccessFactors you can customize your web assistant source once, and then you have to decide for one. Yeah? There is work in progress to make that dynamic, even for the already fully implemented applications, to be a bit smarter, yeah, and wisely choose the source, yeah, based on the target request location. But this is not yet the case. Yeah? So just keep in mind, if you have web dispatcher in place, you would potentially be able to be smart here. In most of the cases, it's sufficient to say, okay, the majority of my target audience is living in Russia, so I will use the Russian server for that purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Voila. So some terms, technical terms that we're going to use from now on. Most of them are well known, most likely, but let's talk about the selector a little. Technically, the Enable Now framework is using so-called selectors to identify objects, UI elements on the target UI. Yeah, and those selectors, it's the complete documentation is talking about the selectors here and there. Yeah, but no one knows what that is. I will show you one later. Don't be scared if you don't speak JavaScript. This will just sound quite Greek to you, but it doesn't matter. I just want to provide you access to it. It's not rocket science. It's not the secret spice. It's just a couple of lines of code that say, if this is the case, then this is the object. Just a mapping. The comparison to what we knew as application profiles in older days, where we had only desktop assistant, is a valid one. Yeah. So if you consider the selector basically as the profiles of the application profiles of Web Assistant, it comes close to reality. Yeah, that's a fair statement to call them like this if you want to explain it in sessions or customer sessions. Stable IDs is the next overloaded term. Yeah, you need stable IDs. You need stable IDs, and no one really knows what that means. Stable ID means there is an ID of the target application's UI elements, which is persistent and reliably the same and unique within the page, right? So you start the browser on day one and your button is called btn_1. And the next day you start your browser again and coming to the same page and your button is still called btn_1. There are lots of scenarios where this is not the case, where button 1 is called button 2 the next day, which obviously leads to the fact that Web Assistant will not be able to find it anymore. Let's talk about that in a second as well. Yeah, so I just want to clarify the terms because we are using them consequently. The famous parameters are our major topic for today. The parameters are just configuration parameters, which are sent to Web Assistant by the famous initialization file. Okay. So this is the initialization set of parameters, like what's my background color, how is my behavior if there is no content available, and will I allow authentication via SAML, for instance? That's all noted here. And those parameters are initially sent to the Web Assistant framework to make the Web Assistant framework know how it should behave in that particular scenario. And all this is called a parameter. And as mentioned earlier, this is that hierarchy. The initialization is the first set, but if you use URL-driven parameters using our famous link generator or this Excel file that I once spread or shared with you, they win. Yeah, so they will override the others, and that's our option for testing, because usually the initialization is the source. Context, it's the same stuff as we talk about in all other scenarios when recording or in Desktop Assistant, the app, the page, the process. Let's talk about that in a second as well. And then the famous UACP, just to get the abbreviation, Resolved User Assistance Content Platform, which is basically only to be known as the repository for all SAP documentations. Yeah, it's a beast of a server, and this is where all the documentations live, and most of the target applications are still hosting their help content there. And since we are the help carrier technology for the standard applications, we are attached to the UACP server in the same way. Yeah, and there is some magic between regarding data conversion, but you don't have to take care about that. What we get there is basically data that is digestible by Web Assistant, for instance, in application help or guided tours. UACP has nothing at all to do with the learning content. That's also one of the biggest question marks sometimes. Yeah, why is the learning content somewhere else? We saw that. That's the reason, right? That's UACP, the default content for in-app help, which is the guided tours, and the regular in-app help content. Everything that's related to Learning Center and the simulations is coming from here. Which is in any case an Enable Now manager. So the UACP term only plays a role as soon as we talk about in-app help and guided tours. So just to get that clear, let's talk about simplified integration. And that is an outlook. And it could be subject to change. Yeah. I'm just giving you a glimpse on what will happen soon, but don't nail me on the fact that I showed it once, because it might be different in release, but just to get an idea. And that's a good baseline for everything that we proceed talking about. Because what integrated applications do is obviously the same as the to be integrated applications would do, but that shows us the data flow again. So now take care, that is actually the essential part of how Web Assistant self-understanding is and how it works in a real-life scenario. Web Assistant init. The Web Assistant initialization, either, and that's the outlook, will be created specifically for the target application to meet its in-app help requirements, which means my background color to fit to my color scheme is red, and I want it to be activated immediately. And any time the hello, welcome guided tour that should automatically be started is the guided tour with the ID ABC123. And in the other application, the background should be green, and the Web Assistant should not initialize automatically, and whatever other aspect could happen, right? So this is what we soon, not now, but soon, will be able to generate for non-covered applications. And how this is going to get in, we're going to see on the next slide. And that's our current scenario, is already existing based on a template and is configured within the target application. And the way how this is configured is nothing that we could influence as Enable Now development group. The decision how this happens is taken from the target applications development teams. And this is where some of the issues in understanding come from. Yeah, because success factors have an own configuration form for that purpose. Also, let's see. S/4HANA Cloud has one, but S/4HANA on-premise, it's still SAP S/4HANA, the big SAP ERP solution. The only technological difference is that one is coming from the cloud and is pre-configured, and one is hosted on-premise, has a totally different approach in configuring this. Yeah, and that's a bit of the failure. Yeah, and you have to get the connection. I'm going to show you that as an example. The Web Assistant settings in SuccessFactors are asking this. Yeah, there is a switch. There is a thing called plugin server. What's the plugin? And the plugin is the help button. Yeah, and others are calling it the extension, and the next team is calling it the help question mark. Yeah? However they're going to call it, this is not in our hands. This is what they do. What you have to know, it's always the same thing. It's Web Assistant.enable now. And if you want to use Canary temporarily, you add Web Assistant and dash Outlook to this and save it. Yeah? It's always the same, even if they all call it differently. And yes, for sure, it would be nice if all the teams would talk to each other and would keep the wording of all this somehow standardized and consistent. Yeah, but it did not happen so far, so I'm not expecting this to happen ever. But in fact, this is just a bloody form. It had nothing to do with functionality. It's just a stupid form where you put your stuff in, and that's the famous parameters, and that's one for now, and it could be 50. Yeah, and that's all the configurations in that single line. And then we have content sources. The custom content source, Education HANA On Demand, which is the SuccessFactors content source for the standard content. That's a good example for not using UICP. The SuccessFactors standard content is hosted on a manager, as you see, based on the URL. And the additional learning content is also hosted within this application. Okay. So this is a good example. And if we later look into other configurations, you will see the parameters asked for are always the same. Yeah? We need to know where the plugin is, we need to know where the custom content is, and we need to know where the learning content is. And some others, like should what's new being immediately displayed, which is just one of the parameters. Yeah? But SuccessFactors team decided that they want to have an own on-off switch for that purpose. Yeah, it could also be held here and say display what's new, timeout, 0, and then it's displayed directly. Yeah, but let's talk about the parameters later. I just want to reduce the complexity a bit, even if, and that's what most of the consultants struggle with, this all looks application to application differently, and sometimes the wording they use is super confusing. It's always about that. It's always the same. Yeah, it's always talking about those servers and about the parameters that gonna initialize this web assistant framework, always coming from the same source and defining the appearance of the help system for the single end user. That's always the same, even if they look totally different. It becomes heavily confusing as soon as the S/4HANA on-premise world becomes involved, right? Because there we have more or less not a predefined form. It's somehow within the configuration backend or within the backend configuration. But it's always the same story. Questions? Good. So we create or we configure it in the application-specific configuration form, and then the framework is loaded. The framework is initialized based on those initialization information in that particular init file, and then the help control is offered to the end user. It's initialized and it's visible. It's physically appearing, a question mark button that you can click. Yeah, the app-specific look and feel is applied based on the configuration, color scheme, behavior. Then the target application provides the content, the meta information and the page context. Based on that, the mixer starts working. For sure, a prerequisite is that the UI elements are reliable in case we have UI element specific helps. And then we're gonna have some configuration parameters that could be changed in runtime or changing in runtime, but this is our last topic. So I'm going to use this, which is actually the recipe for a third-party implementation, as our agenda for today. So we're going from here, top to bottom. It is the same for a to-be implemented application as it is for already configured application. Yeah, it's always the same flow. So let's use it for both. Again, just to have it mentioned at least 4 times, consider everything that I'm talking about regarding the simplified third-party integration as an outlook for now. That could be a matter of change, as already mentioned in the top bottom right corner. So how to implement, that's our outlook. Yeah, that will happen soon. That particular init, yeah, that famous initialization file that says, okay, I'm starting with a red background in that particular behavior, is going to be maintained within Manager. Yeah? So there will be a so-called init builder user interface, and that's just previews for that, within Manager, where some templates for certain applications are going to be provided, where you can change your server address, your product. Carol, this is your example. In that case, in that example, they call the product just generic. There could be another product, could be called however. Peter. And this is the same for the versions, etc. And this configuration is going to create a UI, that's the right-hand side, for that particular application. So what you can expect is that you're going to have a template for Concur, which creates a configuration form in Manager for Concur. And you're going to expect one for application XYZ, let's say, just as an example, random, Microsoft SharePoint. Then you're going to find a template created from us or partly from you, if you dare, to for Microsoft SharePoint, and then you configure one specific Microsoft SharePoint configuration based on the form that is configured with the UI builder on the left. Yeah, and then you configure, okay, for my SharePoint, I'm using this. And then the last question is, if this is configured for the particular case in the customer scenario, how do we get the configuration, the initialization configuration into the target, right? That's the question asked. And this is how that happens. But there was a noise, so there might have been a question.
Can I just summarize in my own words?
Yes, please.
The developers of, let's again, S/4HANA have embedded code into S/4HANA to allow the loading of Web Assistant and to display the question mark, which
exactly
we cannot do just by telling the application, we can't just manipulate any UI by just manipulating the URL, because this code will not be read unless there is this bit of code that is in the application.
Exactly.
So what you've showed on the previous slide is actually both this bit of code saying, I am a question mark and I'm going to display myself in the upper right corner of the application.
Yes.
Plus the parameters?
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Everything that is related to the behavior and the appearance of Web Assistant is initialized in the famous init. Exactly. And any application where Web Assistant is already in, build a application-specific configuration form, transaction, function for that purpose. Yeah, and the one that I showed you was SuccessFactors, just as an example, and all of the others do the same. But the approach is that, and that's what it does. Yeah, and I believe now it's becoming clear. And after we understood this slide, I'm going to show you Concur, which exactly goes that way, because Concur is, as we saw earlier, is not yet implemented, but Web Assistant works fine on it because of that fact that we can do that from the outside since now. And before it was necessary to implement it from the inside only. Yeah, that's the difference. But from a flow perspective, it's always the same. Guys, can we take a quick break?
Yep.
I will pause recording. Recording is back up. And my share as well. So let's proceed. So the data flow from the back end of the target application, which is a random tenant of a random application called tenant A on the right-hand side with the tenant-specific config URL, which is the host of that particular configuration. Let's assume that is initialized by the consumer's end user's browser. So we got the target application, which is a black box, which is white in my case. So let's call it a white box on the left-hand side, and there is the application backend on the right-hand side. Yeah, and what the consumer does is, I want to start working with that application. So what he or she does is starting the front end within the browser, opening Concur, let's say, right? So the application page is loaded, and then the application as such knows, if implemented, that it has a help system called Web Assistant. So there is that line of code that triggers the load of the tenant-specific configuration that lives somewhere within the tenant on a manager. It doesn't matter. You could even put it onto another file server. It doesn't matter. But it's an initialization URL. And if implemented in their backend, that initialization URL is read, and the Web Assistant framework previously loaded is initialized based on the parameters set within that particular file. Okay, and that's the option 2A, because sometimes we don't have access to the application backend. Yeah, because it's a commercial application with a with an unfriendly owner. Let's say this is a competitive situation between SAP and the target application, and just asking, hey, Workday, would you allow me to implement our help system into your application, would probably lead to not that much, close to nothing. So asking makes no sense. So there must be another way. Otherwise, we will never be able to implement Web Assistant into something which is alien to us, and that's 2B. It could also be, and that's the holy cow called browser extension. It could be also injected from the outside, and this is what I'm going to show you in a second, as soon as we clearly stated that we understood that slide. Because that's the baseline. Without that, we don't need to proceed. So there's two ways to get the question mark functionality and its initialization into this target. One, it's properly configured. In that case, tenant A could be substituted by a SuccessFactors tenant or a S/4HANA Cloud tenant. Or anything that was on that other slide on the left-hand side. Anything that is pretty much configured has its own way to configure a native form that gives us all the initializations, and then it's directly read from there. And if we can't, we have another option, and the other option is the browser extension. And how that thing works, I'm going to show you in a second. So then the configuration script from that particular URL is loaded. Yeah? There is two ways, a dynamic way and a static way. We don't have to take care about that. And that access so far is anonymous. Yeah, it's public. There is no need for any authentication. Yeah? So the JavaScripts are loaded. The configuration is loaded. The configuration parameters are applied to the JavaScript framework. And then effectively an authentication takes place. Yeah, so then the web assistant initializes, and the authentication, and that's again a very important information, the authentication is taking place against the content source, not against the framework source, right? So configuration and framework, configuration and the web assistant functionality as such is accessed anonymously, and the authentication takes place as soon as that pre-configured framework within the browser of the end user is requesting content from a content source or from several content sources if the extensibility scenario is applied. So honestly, guys, is this clear? Crystal clear?
So 2A is what we have at the moment for supported applications. Or if for some reason they have their own application which they have developers for, and they develop it themselves.
Yes.
And they do it. And for all the rest, basically we need to hitchhike a browser extension on top of the application that modifies on the client computer. Like you have tons of extension that modify the display of the page, and then you inject your code on client side into it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect summary.
Okay, cool. And the rest is as we know it, basically.
It's all the same. The only question is, from where will the download of Web Assistant framework and the download of that particular initialization file that defines how Web Assistant framework shall behave in the target scenario be loaded from? In the one case, as you said, there is a commitment. The target applications developer team said, yes, we're going to implement that one line of code to run that download bootstrap, to load the framework, and we're going to provide a form where you can put in your funny configuration parameters. And then it's all coming from here. And in all other cases, it's coming from somewhere. And the entry point for the somewhere is the browser extension.
And the manager config, the load step number 3, load config script from URL provided. This is only necessary in case of 2B.
No, but let's just park this and it will be clear next slide. Yeah, but this is what I'm going to show you now. So now that's what I'm showing later. I'm showing it in a practical example, and I believe then we have absolute clarity. So here we have SuccessFactors. SuccessFactors is one of the green applications in our previous slide left-hand side column, fully implemented, which means we got that the Web Assistant settings form for administrators. Yeah, so an admin can get there, and an admin can configure how the pre-implemented help system called Web Assistant shall behave and look like in that particular SuccessFactors instance of the company best run. Okay, so let's move to Concur, and I couldn't find a better example. So Concur smells like it's SAP. Yeah? So it might be the same case. But it's different because, as you remember on that slide, Concur was on the very right-hand side column. Yeah, it's in planning, but it's not yet implemented. So the Concur team did not create such a form for us, and they did not call the Web Assistant framework automatically yet. But there is still a Web Assistant. So let's see. Yes, I keep working like a devil. Where is my? I opened it once. I don't want to destroy the fun, but no, I closed it again. So I'm going by, I'm using my my productive Launchpad And you see, enablement assistant lives here, and the web assistant plugin lives here. Yeah, so we have two. One, the enablement assistant that you all have to know, is the one that gives us context information from the browser when we record things, when we re-record things, or if we want to use desktop assistant for resolving web contexts. This is what enablement assistant is for, and it's mandatory anyway for all customer projects for Edge Chromium and Chrome and Firefox. Yeah, so it must be there, otherwise particular things simply are not working. That's the new guy. The new guy is the Web Assistant extension. And if you click the Web Assistant extension, it's already available in the shops. Yeah? So you can shop it on Google on Chrome extension store, and you can also shop it on Edge Chromium extension store. And it only has one function called settings. So let's have a quick look to the settings before I proceed launching my Concur instance. So there is a Reba configuration here, and there is an internal Concur configuration here, and that's the configuration portion. And it says the init script URL, the URL where the Web Assistant initialization script, the famous init script for Concur is coming from, is a certain manager. Doesn't matter. It's a, you believe me, that's a manager, right? And that manager hosts, guess what? The Web Assistant JS file. I'm grabbing that address quickly because we have a look at it in a second. I copied it to my clipboard. And this injection of this configuration script, the initialization script URL, is based on a certain app URL pattern. That means the URL of the target application follows a certain pattern. It contains the string eu1.conquersolutions.com. If that's matching, and that decision is taken, that's the only functionality of that plugin, basically. If that matches, this configuration script is loaded, and if this initialization script, Java Web Assistant JS, is loaded, and we have all the configuration parameters in here, it's just initialized properly. If not, optionally, you could add additional parameters here, which gives us quite a flexibility. How to get this into the customer's world? Let's talk about that in a second. Most likely, this is going to become the second question. However, this is an initialization for the extension. So the browser extension, the single browser extension knows, okay, I'm watching the URLs. This thing is called however, but now, since this is active, it's switched on. Let's go there and open my productive travel and expenses app called Concur. You see what happened. There's a green tick mark here, and there was this little iframe. And there we go. Yeah, this guy is active now. You see, if you hover it and see the tooltip, that it has access to that particular site at that moment. It becomes green. The website initialized. The website's initialization triggered the download. Let's go just quickly back to the settings of this initialization file that we could put aside, copy it, and look at it. That's the configuration file. So again, flow, that application triggered the extension. The extension knows, oh, my URL pattern, EU1 is matching. That means I know that this is the particular application, all right? And this extension triggered the download and execution of this. This is our complete app configuration. You see, the variable app configuration comes with variables. The UACP URL, whether there's multi-page used or not, where are the resources, what's the ID of the help button, all this stuff, down to the color codes. Yeah, everything is in here. Plus some others, like the famous selectors, themes, what applications, product, what version, latest. All the stuff that we talked is in here. And that happened in this particular scenario, based on that address, triggered by that application. And since it's not fully implemented, it's done via the extension and not via the initialization that is somehow built in. And there we go. That's Web Assistant on Concur, even if
cool.
Concur is not yet implemented. Guys, don't run around and tell people that we support Concur now, okay? Honestly, this is not the case. I'm just using that because I have no better showcase, okay? That's an outlook. It's not yet the case. Wait for the official communication. But you know now how it works technically. And this is what I want to ensure, because that's the most important part of it. You need to understand how that technically works. And it's basically, if you once understood it, not really rocket science anymore. Yeah, it's just a question where all this shit comes from and what servers are involved in the full scenario. So let's get back to the slide, and then we can dig around in the content a bit. Yeah? But it's just a little showcase. Where are we? Where's my slide share? I still share somewhere. There you go. Huh? So no scenario. Wait a sec. Here. Wait, scenario 2B. Load config URL from the browser extension. That's what happens based on the pattern involved here. The application page was loaded. The plugin realizes, yep, that matches. So the front end is fitting to a certain convention, like the URL has a certain infix, or however to identify the target application, which means, okay, I'm not expecting the tenant-specific config URL being part of it. No, I'm injecting it from the outside. I'm injecting that one line of code that loads this script from the outside and run it in the context of the target. And that's what we got. We got the green tick mark. Yes, I'm active and I'm doing things. This guy is injecting that one line, loading the Web Assistant JS, which then triggers the download of the framework and the initialization of the framework within the context of Concur through the backdoor, through that particular extension. And then we got a full functional Web Assistant in place with all the possible restrictions. In that case, you see there is always one, already one. It's not intending. Yeah, you see it's overlaying. It's not intending the application. For reasons, because the frame set of Concur, we haven't even spoken with Concur developers about that. Yeah, it's done through the backdoor without any cooperation. Yeah, and there is, okay, the frame set doesn't allow us to move it to the side because it's built in a way that makes that impossible. Okay, then we overlay it. Yeah? That's already one indicator. Yeah? But besides that, it's all quite robust, as you see. Down to the objects, there is dummy guided tours. I'm not going to use that. There is a learning app with certain cases in there. Yeah? And there is edits. So it's all there. It's all working fine. I want to make sure that you understood the flow to there. Yeah? And it's always the same. Keep in mind, it's not special if it's coming from the outside or if it's already pre-implemented. And only that fact that the configuration methods are application specific, application per application, is just the fact that it's in the responsibility of a different team, not in our responsibility. Yeah? If you would ask Enable Now development, we would have one standardized a configuration form for all the applications, but that's nothing that we can influence. But that's the story, right? So, and then usually the next question is, okay, that is a cool idea, that plugin is there. So how are we going to, and that's also an outlook, get that URL specific to be injected configuration rolled out to customers' employees? Because, and then I will resolve the miracle. Here, in that settings, you saw that it's a manual configuration. I can just add a new line here or a new configuration and do it myself. And you cannot expect in a 20,000 seat company to make 20,000 potential end users configure this form one by one manually. That wouldn't make no sense. So the next question is, if we proceed with that simplified integration approach, how are we going to get this rolled out? And that's the next one. It's going to happen via the registry. There is a registry template, and that configuration and the URL recognition pattern is to be rolled out via this particular registry entry, which is then again read by the extension, and the extension is using it. Yeah? So And that's the only thing. You don't have to know this by heart. And as you see, it's just the parameters again, the initialization URL. It's just a template. And let's have a look at it completely in a text editor. Where is it? There. Notepad++ with some highlighting. Yeah, and there you see, there's a template that this is going to be shipped. Yeah, this is going to be part of the standard, and this is what you are going to use. No, it's just saying, guy, yeah, you load the Google Chrome third-party extension with that ID, and make it make it trusted. Yeah, and then you have a certain configuration with an application which is active. Yeah? The initialization URL is the URL to that particular JavaScript file that I showed you. And then you can start configuring it. Give it a name, give it whatever. Add parameters, completely empty, or put them all into your init file. And that's one, and there could be plenty. Okay, and that's how we're gonna roll it out. So it's a wise decision. The others are doing it in a similar way. And that always works, and this is what you have to keep in mind, even if you want to prepare those approaches already with customers, be aware that this is going to require customer IT's involvement, because you will not be able to change the registries of the single user machines. Yeah, and that's not possible in any case, which means if you have to prepare such scenarios right now, you have to take care that you have the software deployment folks, the packagers, already in access. Yeah, because there is a little package to create, to build those registry manipulations, to really get, to stay concrete, those X configurations that we would use for that purpose into the browsers of all the users. Otherwise, this comes blank. Yeah, and the configuration would be a manual effort, which would in any case not work. Okay. So that's what we talk about here. And this is, as you see, I can provide examples for everything. So we are close to final. We are not far away. And it will be available, officially available very, very soon. So I just want to make sure that you understand the flow. Up to here, any questions?
So the coding will be developed by SAP and provided. So we just basically put in the URL of where the web assistant JS for that particular application is stored.
This guy codes for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? And what we're gonna provide, left-hand side, is templates, configuration templates for certain well-known applications,
mm-hmm.
or for not yet back-end-wise implemented applications. So you're gonna find a configuration template for Concur, for instance. Yeah? But you will not find a configuration template for the niche software for breweries in the Odenwald. For sure not. Yeah.
Okay.
How could we?
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you want to equip that particular niche software for Odenwald breweries with the web assistant, we have to talk. Yeah? Because there is no clear statement, and neither is there a clear responsibility defined somehow who is going to do that. Yeah? That it depends a bit on your JavaScript scripting and coding capabilities. Yeah, it's not hard to understand if you speak JavaScript, so nothing speaks against doing that manually on your own. Yeah? But I can't answer that question. It's a question of skill set, and the skill set is you need to understand JavaScript. Yeah? What we need mandatorily is to understand the flow and where the data is coming from and what the capabilities are. Yeah, but if you have your brewery software for the Odenwald in access, potentially there is effort. Yeah? And effort is consulting effort, and consulting effort has to be paid.
Mm-hmm.
But who effectively is going to do that in the end if there is no configuration template yet? This is not clear. Neither to me. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
This is either a team that we have to build or a skill set that we have to somehow create on your end.
Mm-hmm. So it's not like the profile development.
No.
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 Okay.
No.
Okay.
Because it's effectively simpler, even if it looks more complex. It's simpler because there's templates for everything. And this comes, there will be generic app templates, and I believe we can beat a lot with the generic ones already in the first run. But this is the idea. There's a template. The template creates the form contains the concrete configuration. This is going to create an initialization script. The initialization script can be hosted on a manager, and then we have the closed loop. The plugin injects that initialization based on a certain rule, which usually is a URL pattern.
Okay, got it.
Cool.
And I mean, just out of curiosity, can you imagine a scenario where you would even go for that configuration, even if it's an S4 system? Because
yes, for sure. No. I was thinking wrong. No, not for S4.
No.
Yeah, because it's there and you have a backend configuration capability. Yeah, for a custom launchpad, that could be a case. For instance, let's take that as a proper example. You have a launchpad created, and that launchpad is using or is abused, let's say, as a collection of links to other applications. Our internal productive one at SAP is pretty much a good example. This points to Concur. This points to an UI5 app. There we got Skype, and there we got a jam group. So this is a wild mixture of different technologies, and this launchpad has nothing to do with any standard. The only fact is it's a launchpad, so it can host web assistant on that level. But if you jump out to wherever, you are there on the wherever. And the wherever is potentially not fully supported. That could be a project to say, hey, we want a unique end user performance support experience in that portal, whatever target technology comes. And that would be a couple of days, but nevertheless, it would be feasible to say, yeah, we're going to implement here one recognition pattern per target, and we're going to initialize it one by one. Whatever target technology is behind this tile. Because you cannot predict whether this is a UI5 app that is rendered in the context of that launchpad, or if it leaves you this one, that this is our corporate portal. This had absolutely nothing to do with that application, but it's just considered from an end user perspective as one of those tiles out of many. And that would be a scenario where we could take that into consideration.
So there's this. There's a certain simplicity of, now you see in Concur, the question mark is in the right middle section, and if you would configure it the same way everywhere, it would always be at the same position, and it would not be in the status bar up there or wherever. So there's a certain simplicity to it, especially when we talk about web assistant, desktop assistant, handshake and stuff. So it's all of a sudden now we have 3 different ways of in-app help.
That's the pity. If we are integrated, we have to follow the integrated way. Which in 90% of the cases, it's the question mark with the rounded with the circle icon around it in the header. But maybe the target application has no header. If there's no header, there's no place for the question mark. So you have to put it somewhere else. Even internally, just as a glimpse, we come back to field glass later, but I like the field glass that much that I have to show it to you. It's the most beautiful showcase content that we have in place. So field glass, there you go. The question mark, there it is. Look at that. It's not us. The field glass team decided that they have their use for the question mark with the rounded icon around it already, which is this shit. So we are this.
Oh no.
Oh yeah. This is us. Because this is already in use. Decision was taken by the target. We cannot influence the decision. Customers will be able to do so. And most likely customers are going to complain and say, what bullshit is that? The question mark is always the web assistant, and maybe that will change soon. But for now, this is us, and that's the other help. Consistency overall, sometimes it's a bit of a pity. Yeah, but here, that's a well good example. And then if we compare with Conquer, now Conquer has this is no header here. Yeah, there's nothing we can somehow get in. There is no configuration layer for that. It's because it's a standard web application, so it's a hovering flying one. Yeah, and you are absolutely right. Yeah, this is where I see some storms. The winter is coming. Yeah, in terms of media didactics, yeah, from a consistency perspective. Yeah, but nevertheless, I'm happy already to be able to provide something, yeah, even if it becomes inconsistent in some cases.
So one way to get around this would be to start Web Assistant always expanded.
For instance, yeah, and this is one of the parameters, and exactly that scenario we're going to talk about in a second, because this will generate consistency pretty much everywhere. Yeah? But it comes with a negative aspect, which is you lose space. Yeah, and you will force them to use the help each time and see it. Yeah? And if they minimized it and they change the page, it will come back, which could be considered as annoying. Yeah? So right now, I don't have a happy flow, honestly speaking. There's work in progress. Yeah, but the good news is we can get in. So let's get further. Initialization and config in details. So first of all, side story. I just put it here because it makes sense, yeah, to talk about details. Be aware of the new way of integrating this into S4 on-prem. S4 on-prem has had the most complex way of configuring this catalog entry, and then you had to type your parameters in that Fiori cockpit thing manually one by one. You all might have done this once already. Yeah, you saw this. It was not very user friendly. Okay, so with the latest release, take care, on-prem 2020. There was a transaction created called UI2/FLP CASConf, which is a regular SAP GUI transaction with all the capabilities of configuring Web Assistant for an S4HANA on-prem within the SAP GUI. And that was implemented as a side effect of the fact that from now on, we do not require Web Dispatcher anymore for S4HANA on-prem. So there is an option to run S4HANA on-prem together with Web Assistant, even without Web Dispatcher. Very good news for us. Reduces the complexity of the implementation a lot. But only since 2020. So, and these guys implemented a UI within the GUI, which is pretty much straightforward. No, it's well documented. No, it's far easier than before, but you see there is the data URL UACP, there is the editor feature, there is the learning app community URL, all the known or the mainly known parameters are in that list. But some, the newer ones, like for instance, SAML new window that we use very often, is not in that list. Yeah, I don't know how many tickets we had around this. It's a 3-digit number. And there's a funny sense of humor of these guys sometimes. It's the famous parameters parameter. Need to get that. Yeah, they wanted to keep that maintenance free. So they picked a random subset of the existing parameters and made them explicit, just to have that one little guy called parameters parameter, where you put all the ones in that are not on that list. And that's not even documented. Okay, yeah, you know now, take care. It's the famous parameters parameter. Everybody stepped into that trap once. If it's not in that list, you put it here. The separator is a semicolon, and then we are good to go. Okay, yeah, and it's not written nowhere. Yeah? At least for now. I raised a change request to put that info at least here into our documentation, and it's in the latest one. It's already in. I took that screenshot from the published one, I believe, Monday or so. We're gonna have that info in there. For now, you know, yeah, it's parameters, the parameters parameter, which is a stack of unknown parameters which are not in that configuration list, and you can put any in. You also could put the others in there. right? You could put your complete parameters tail only into that one without using the others. Yeah?
Okay.
That's all good. It's all the same. Okay, just to get the developer sadism tackled a bit. That's what it is about. Okay, just a side story, but now you know. Let's go through our flow. First, load the framework. How to load the framework? And there is the Web Assistant JavaScript. The Web Assistant JavaScript is the initialization JavaScript to implement the question mark. We saw what it contains. Let's get back to it quickly. That's my registry. Where's the other guy? It's the Chrome. That's registry. That's registry. I want the init. I haven't opened it yet. That's where my init works. That's my init. That's the init for my Conquer example, right? Web Assistant JS, and that one is loaded. And what it actually does is knowing that it has to open a certain URL to load the help for JS. That's the source for the JavaScript framework as such. Help for JS. That's the code that used by the question mark function. Going back, that's the first thing that is loaded. Oops, sorry. The Web Assistant, as one of the mandatory portions, loads the help for JS file, and the help for JS file optionally references some default resources Web Assistant is using. The most common ones are the default style sheet, and the text style sheet, and the icons that we are using within Desktop Assistant, which is a font. So basically, the Web Assistant JS, called the init script, is initializing a stack of downloads that cascades from the help for JS, and this one, or the script as such, referencing some resources that are used, that are usually coming from a central location. Okay, but that's the minimum set of data that has to be loaded while bootstrapped to make the question mark appear and look as configured. Okay.
And the help for .js is on our framework server?
Either on our framework server or hosted somewhere else if the decision was taken to do that. And that's what we do because we have to. And that's the buzzword, isolated networks. If you are working for the CIA, they will not let their servers talk to a server in Germany. So you have to put it to their server.
Okay.
And then there's another location. But in 99% of the cases, this is coming from our framework server. webassistant.enablenow.cloud.sap or one of the local mirrors if we are in China or Russia. Okay.
All right.
And this guy says, okay, and I need defaults, and the defaults are coming also in most of the cases from that central resource. And how to maintain those is again something that we're going to see in the parameter section later, because they can be changed and routed to somewhere else. Yeah, partly by using adaptable resources, especially for the textiles, and partly by overriding their default settings with parameters. The only thing that we cannot properly influence now, but there's a change request pending, is the icon set. This is more or less considered as hard-coded. Good. So, and then the help control comes in. This is just nothing special. It just says, hey, yeah, in most of the cases, we're using this, except with the field class guys, because they decided that it should be different. However, it's there if it's pre-configured, and it's not there if it's not pre-configured, right? Because it has no location. No developer built that button in that is activated by the initialization. Right? If we inject it from the outside, we have to find our place for it. In all of the cases, the only function that this button has is calling the API function of the help for of the framework of the JavaScript called toggle WA. That's the only thing it does. And toggle WA means, let's go back to our Conquer example. Yeah, here it's hovering. Yeah, it feels, it behaves a bit like desktop assistant. It's stuck on the outside of the screen. Why? Yeah, because no programmer yet implemented a question mark button that could be activated in the actual frame set. Yeah, so it's outside of the frame set. But what it does is it toggles a JavaScript function called toggle WA, and toggle WA does that. It opens or closes the sidebar. Not more, not less. The rest is more or less an automation that again comes from the help4.js framework. Okay, so that's what it does. And in case somebody will ask you, for the third-party implementation, those informations are crucial because this is the stuff that you have to brief your cooperating partners, knowing the target. But there will be a coding guideline for that. Yeah, so I will show you later anyway. Yeah, this is I left it in just to make sure that you understand what it actually does. That button there's no magic. The button just says open that thing or close it again. Not more, not less. Good. And then the application specific look and feel. And now we come to our best friend, the web assistant link generator. This is the tools that we use, or the tool that I'm usually using in customer workshops to apply design and try out modifications, configuration modifications in the easiest way. Question: has anybody of you not known that thing? Let's open it. I will put the link into the chat. It lives. Now I closed the wrong one. Our IDP is a bit strange behaving today. Yeah, it is on the external info center. Yeah, that means anybody can access it. Yeah, you just need to know the link, and it's a bit hidden, unfortunately. But nevertheless, I'm going to give you that in the chat. Then you got it. Go wait. There we go. So that's link generator. Yeah, link generator explains itself a little, but we're going to close it again and then show you what it does. The link generator is first of all equipped with Web Assistant. So it's not only the generator for Web Assistant modifications and configurations, it's also a perfect example how Web Assistant can be integrated into third-party applications, because that is a native application, homegrown. But nevertheless, it hosts Web Assistant, and it's super simple. So we're going to have a look at the bootstrap to summarize what we learned so far based on that example as well. Yeah, so two cases here. First case, target application URL is the first, it has an asterisk, the first and the only mandatory thing. In which application do we want to use this? So let's use my SuccessFactors instance. Yes, I want to be kept. Yes. Holy. If we would get the lifetime back that we wait for authentications after timeouts, it would be a couple of years. So I'm going to home in my SuccessFactors tenant, and that is pre-configured, as you saw. That was the Web Assistant configuration dialog, and I'm using this, always ending with the question mark. Copy it and get to my configuration and say, this is how I want this to happen, right? And then we have the editor true false switch, and we have the scenario switch where we define not set, use it as it is. Extensibility of default content with a new ACP backend, which would count for most of the cases. And there is a distinction between extensibility with default content on an Enable Now backend. Ignore this for now. I'm going to explain later that there is a tiny difference, which is only technologically driven. You need one parameter more or less if you distinguish between those two, but that's more or less a legacy issue and has no functional impact. It's that was one of your questions, Caroline. The RO, the read-only model, has to be set to WPB in one case and have to be left out in the other. Yeah? That's the only difference. But basically, that's the EXT scenario. And custom content only would point to wherever. So I'm using the wherever scenario just to make the difference obvious.
Are we getting to that later again?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a own slide for that purpose. So
okay.
I'm using my work area on my tenant here. So I'm using this. Where's my work area ID here? So I'm copying my work area into, oh God, I lost track. I'm looking like a Mac user, too many tabs. There we go. And using the old syntax here, take care. We need a work area link, old syntax with the ending slash. Yeah, so it says that's the POC tenant that I'm using, and the work area is my work area where the custom content for that target shall come from. And I want to be editor. That's the most simple adjustment. Yeah, right now, my SuccessFactors tenant called sales, blah, blah, blah. If opening desktop assistant contains the standard content and I'm not an author. Obviously, I'm not. I'm leaving this open, and I'm grabbing the, guys, I don't want to confuse you with my toggle around. I hope I'm not doing so. There you go. I'm using that and I'm generating my result URL, pink. So now, as you see, there is a URL in there, which I now copy or press that button to launch it in a new pop-up, which contains all the parameters that I set. Help-editor is true. Service layer is SEN. That means I am only an SEN content, custom content only. Yeah, so it can be substituted SEN with WPB. The help URL is my tenant, and so on and so forth. So Web Assistant still initializes. Authentication is now against my tenant. There is no content in my tenant. So I'm asked to add standard or add what's new, just by having changed the URL based on that files, on this data, okay? So what does that mean? That means, and that's the first thing that we all have to keep in mind, the URL parameters always win. However, things are configured. That's my standard configuration. Standard content, no edit. That's my overwritten one, asking me to add content. Honestly speaking, I don't know why the working on homepage is still in there. I believe I fetched it once, but I'm editor, as you see here. Yeah, totally different thing, same server, same instance, same runtime. Yeah, same moment in time and same runtime. Two fully different scenarios. Why is this possible? This is possible just because this guy gives us the freedom to add as many of those funny parameters to our URL as we want and play around with the whole thing. Now do something nasty to really see the change. Add accent foreground set to whatever color, orange, and the background of the accents we're gonna set to red. And the UI foreground we're gonna set to blue. Generate it again, open it again. Then the change should be obvious, yeah, because now there is eye cancer danger in place. You see, yeah, all the changes are implemented immediately without having to affect the implemented configuration, if there is one, which gives you as consultants the chance to play around and align with customers' representatives beforehand, and then end up with the final set of parameters, and then make an appointment with the administrator and said, this is our parameters. This is how we want things to happen. Please implement this for us. Yeah, which doesn't waste the time of that particular person that much. But you see the difference. Yeah, and my common instance, common configuration, still totally different. My overwritten one, it's this one, based on the new color scheme. Wow, does that look odd? Okay, got the story. I hope so, at least. Going back to my configuration, and this goes down to the atom. Yeah, there's anything in that is relevant. Tracking how what's new should behave. You can fake things in here, the product, the version, override it, yeah, to try an update. Yeah, anything that you need in workshops, yeah, can be used for that purpose. It's a beauty, because it's far easier than my dumb Excel sheet that I once created for you guys. Yeah, it's a super cool thing. You can now in the current version even select a configuration and save it, yeah, which is new. So you have your own stack of configurations here, which is saved. So you can save your stuff, have X independent configuration. So you can really use that as a daily usable tool, and it contains the actual parameter configuration and the parameter description as a web assistant. Yeah, so it's using its own dog food. Web assistant is explained with web assistant, for sure it is, otherwise it wouldn't make sense. But you see the beauty of it. It's the string below. This is how to copy it to the clipboard. This is how to launch it as a pop-up immediately. And you have X configurations to be saved, which are private to you. Be aware, this is not saved in the backend, that's saved in a local cookie. If you delete your local cookies, your configurations will be dead as well. So that was the one thing that I wanted to show you, yeah, and encourage you to use it, yeah, because it's the easiest way to make other people understand how the whole thing is working and what are your freedom levels in configuration. The other thing is, and now I just want to repeat where we started, is the Bootstrap as such, yeah, because it hosts Web Assistant as well. Now, so let's have a look to the Bootstrap, because this is an easy thing. It's just an HTML form with a little code in it, with an own init that is coming from an own server. So let's just use it as an example to just summarize what we did so far. I'm pressing F12 and toggling back to my full view. This is the console, and console is actually your best friend. Console on network is loaded, and I'm now going to reload with Control F5 that thing, and it was now reloaded. And you see the download tree here is quite overviewable. There's not that much in, because it's mainly the Web Assistant initialization and just a little of that application, because that's only a one-pager. But you see everything that we talked about so far in here. The Web Assistant init script. I'm just hovering it to give you a glimpse on the URL. EnableNow.cloud.sub, our info center, right? And there is a Web Assistant _init_min_.s, which is the minimum configuration script, initialization script of a Web Assistant. Going in here and double clicking it gives you a view on it. And that's the absolute minimum configuration of Web Assistant. It creates a button, it loads the UI5 and initializes stuff based on a certain theme. It opens it immediately in the minimized mode. That's all the parameters that you know. That's the init script. Going back to my source, which was loaded. It's asynchronous, so basically the help.js was loaded already before. The reason is that this is hard-coded, so not the init script takes care of the download of the framework as such. It's hard-coded within the page. Why is that possible? Because the page is owned by us. So there is a line of code saying download JS, help for JS beforehand. That could also have been implemented in the init. So then the init says, okay, this is how I'm going to be used, and then the icon fonts, the logos, and all the other parts that the runtime needs are actually downloaded and initialized. And then .track tracks the usage. Tracking is active here. That means if you use the link, Web Assistant link generator, the usage that you are doing so is obviously tracked. Otherwise, there would be no .track. What does .track do? always looking into the response or the response preview. This is where I'm usually going in to see what's happening here. It just says, okay, that was used within that session. That's it. Then we got, based on the initialization of the theme, the Quartz themes, styles have been loaded. In the preview, you see what's actually part of it. So it's very straightforward. And then effectively, so now let's go quickly back to our slides. We are here. The help control is initialized. The application specific look and feel is applied while downloading the corresponding files and all this stuff. And then the target, our little link generator, was providing context meta information and the content. We know that the parameters are, the UI elements are robust here because it works. And that led to the fact, going back to my console, that it was fully implemented and is usable. And then the catalog request is sent. The catalog is requested, that you see here in the header. It asks, guys, what we got for that particular context in the link generator. That's what this URL is saying. And the response is, hey, for that one, we got one project called PR84D5, which contains those contents. Because that's only a one-pager, it's only one project. Wherever you go, you will always end up with the same project. This is why I love this as an example. It's just one page. It's doing everything that a complex application would do as well, but it's easy to use for making people understand. Because you can go from top to bottom, and it's only dealing with web assistant. So the catalog entry comes, this is the catalog, then the context refinement request comes, same stuff. The response says, this is what you got. This is the different projects. So this is that content. This is that. The context call and the response out of it. So is this clear? What I wanted to achieve with that? It's a super cool example, because you don't have to filter, you don't have to search the application specific calls. Now, if you would do the same in an S/4HANA system, you would have hundreds of entries here, and it's hard to identify the ones that are really relevant for us. But here it's only us plus one page. This is the reason why this is so easy. Okay, so this is what I'm usually using this for, debugging. If some parts are red in here, you will find the reason why they are. There's no fav icon. Okay. Only error. Sometimes the catalog requests fail because of proxy system settings errors or whatever. So this console is your best friend if you want to debug something, and you know that, I believe. One thing that you might have not known yet is the fact that it has a console. You can do things here, and that there is web assistant namespace. So if you type web assistant dot after the help4.js was loaded, tricky one, you see all the JavaScripts that could be applied to that particular function. And that's a cool one, because let's pretend set theme light tink ding runtime. I was just posting Web Assistant a command, and the command was immediately executed just by using the console. So it's a wise decision to have an idea that this is there, assistant dot, and that we got some set commands to set, and we also have dot get commands to get. And that's probably, if you are in a debugging situation, a quite cool one. Because you can check whether the target application sends the wrong screen ID, that probably a fully crazy resource URL was used. You can go down to the single DOM objects and point to them and see what Web Assistant would do out of it. So if you spend some time on that, you will start loving it. Because sometimes it's the easiest way to implement a modification for trials on the one hand, and to get information out without having to use our information toggle, no, the I, the bottom layer, yeah, or the property info sheet of Web Assistant as such. No? All those infos are here, and it obviously makes a more professional view on you if you do that in workshops rather than using the
Totally.
UI. I'm just kidding, huh? Yeah, but this is the nerdy way. But keep it in mind. Yeah, sometimes it's the only way to get things done, and you have a full code documentation in the console. Yeah, you see what it can do, you see what it can't do. Yeah, you can do coolest things in here. We will not go into detail. I just wanted to show it to you and encourage you to play with it a bit because it really is handy. Okay.
So I could, for example, here get a list. Imagine I'm unsure if the catalog was configured correctly, typos, whatever. I can get the list of the parameters in the console to double check before okay, cool.
All this, yeah, you can in some applications you will not be able to see the context it sends, yeah, because it's coarse and encrypted. So you wouldn't see it in the response, but you can call Web Assistant Framework and ask for it, and it will give it to you. Yeah, that's the main part where I'm using it to just check environment related parameters that are not somewhere represented in the UI, but you need it to get a decision. Okay, there's something wrong. Yeah? There's an issue. Yeah, so this is why you have to know it. It's a very handy tool. Good. So specific look and feel and how to play. That's the one guy. That's the other guy. Keep in mind, Web Assistant namespace has a lot of functionality, and most of them are more or less self-explaining. Yeah, especially the get ones. If you want to know whether something is supported, you get the UI5 version of it. Then you know, because if the handbook says, okay, this is supported after UI5 build number 17, and your customer has no clue which build they run, you ask and you know. Yeah, this is all stuff that you can get out of the console. For that purpose, reinitialize, destroy and reinitialize. All the cool stuff can be done here. So browser dev tools, and that counts for Chrome as well as for Edge. Chromium in the same way. I have not yet played with the Firefox console so far, but most likely it works the same and can do the same. But I have no insights here. So color schemes, as you saw, that's just a random example of those. This is the color schemes, just as an overview page. I mean, you know them, and that's the baseline. And if we're going to go further, we have the color and look and feel related parameters. That's just a cutout of the list, and all of those could be, if none of the standard color schemes would fit to the requirements, could be adjusted color by color and behavior by behavior. This is a link again to the internal info center where we got the full parameter reference in there. Yeah, and now we come closer and closer to our core topic. Yeah, and that's the most important page. It should be more prominent if you ask me. Within the integration section, yeah, that's the full set of all parameters that Enable Now Web Assistant currently supports, yeah, with all the possibilities. So that's one other source to this info, but you will recognize that this is the same, right? Let me just close this. Yeah, so this and this are equivalents to each other. Yeah? The rest is question of taste. And this table will end up, or probably even already is, part of the implementation guide as well. Yeah, so the implementation guide describes the most important ones, and the ask was to add the full parameter documentation to the implementation guide, at least as an appendix, and most likely this is going to happen. But for now, know this URL and use it, because that's the one that is maintained always based on the releases. I'm going to put that into the chat as well. Voila. So, guys, where have we been? There. No, not there, but there. So Web assistant colors. Okay, that's all about design. Now, just a little glimpse back to the metadata to get this this latest thing sorted out. Context is sent by the target, or is hard-coded by the init if the target cannot send it, or must be extracted from the target somehow with the according function. But this all, how are we going to do that JavaScript-wise, is going to be our core topic for the next one, where we have an official go, as soon as we have an official go. And then we're going to really guide you from A to Z through that complete procedure, how we make the application send the context, etc. For now, let's just wrap up the context as such again, to have an idea how contexts work in Web Assistant again, if you don't know yet. So there's product and version, product name SuccessFactors, product version 1805. Why is 1805 always 1805? Because SuccessFactors somehow hard-coded the version 1805 at a certain day in time. There can be confusing things. Again, just like the discussion earlier, it's not in our responsibility. Every application behaves just as it intends to behave. And SuccessFactors, they do not maintain their product version. They always send 1805. Okay, we have to live with it. But that's not enable now. It's sent by the target. This is what we should understand now. But this is like, if you compare that to the world of the older days where we only had desktop assistant, this is the application context. The application context says, I am SuccessFactors in version 1805. Yeah, and then the next level is not based context, it's a filter, but the filter is, and my user is speaking English, so show me English content only. And the system property is something then you can optionally maintain. The standard applications do not. It's a third level of the application context where in a real customer scenario, you could, for instance, distinguish between a development and a productive system if you want to separate that. This is also an option to settle certain target group specifics into the web assistant, if it's possible. Yeah. Question then is, SuccessFactors admin, would you be able to send system if people is coming from the US and send another system ID if people are coming from another direction, to be able to distinguish between different contents? If the answer of the administrator is yes, it's a good choice to say this content is for here, this content is for there. If not, it's not possible. It's just a third parameter. Not that much to do with system, and none of the standard applications are using it. It's just a third parameter of the application context. Okay, then we got the language, which is a filter. And there, as you know, English US is the global fallback language, which is not yet configurable. Change request is pending. No idea if there will be a fallback change soon or not, but for now, you know, English is the fallback. And there is no way to change that. I lately had to, which led me to the fact that I created French content under the English flag to make French become the actual fallback language. Yeah? It's not pretty at all, but it works. Yeah, but it confuses people a lot, obviously. Okay, but yeah, that's still the case, just to make sure. And then we got the context, and the context is separated from the web assistant context form. It's the one context parameter, and this is however the application is sending us the context. Yeah? It's like, it's a breadcrumbish approach in SuccessFactors. That's the admin homepage for SuccessFactors, and it's the part behind the hash in the URL if we are in a Fiori Launchpad. And it could be any other information coming from any other variable in any other application. It doesn't matter. Yeah, and that's not ours relation. That's not our responsibility. Again, that is the responsibility of the target application, and the target application sends it somehow. And if we are implementing Enable Now through the extension, that's the most important investigation task for you or for whomever later when we try to investigate how we could implement, is how could we, which parameter, which attribute of the page as such could we interpret as a context, and then create a little JavaScript that digs that information out of the page and sends it as the page context to have a page context. Yeah? But there is no rule here. It must be unique. That's the only rule. Okay. Latest comes into play here. Product version. Yeah? And that's basically which was lately implemented. If the help for JS framework is asking, give me your version. Since last release of most of them, the targets answered with a number, 1805. Or for S4HANA, if you have a 2-level versioning, 2005.500 for 2005 hotfix 1. Yeah. And then latest was implemented, which basically is not more than a string as well, but it says I'm the latest version. And if latest is requested, the target application sends back latest and then in brackets, the real version. And the modification in Web Assistant was if latest matches latest, don't care about the version and render latest. And if version is set, look into the brackets. That's what it does, not more, not less. So effectively, if you have content configured to latest, and from now on current releases of the target applications, latest is sent, nothing regarding visibility of content in version change situations has to be maintained anymore, because latest is always the latest. And you know that this comes with some risk, because if there is a change happening that makes your content becoming invalid after the update because it's not true anymore, and if you configured latest, it will still be visible. Before, it was a number. That means it was initially invisible, and yet you had to choose one by one whether you want to make it visible again by using the version maintenance functionality in Producer. Yeah. For latest, you don't have to do that again. Yeah, but you should not be ignorant here in terms of changes, because it could be the case. Yeah? And latest opens the door for performance support systems that tell the untruth. And from my personal point of view, that's the #1 acceptance killer for us. Yeah? If our systems tell the untruth, people will not accept us as help, so they will not use us. And that's where I personally think that latest has a certain risk that you need to discuss. Yeah, so do not just configure everything down to latest and use it. And do me personally a favor and inform the customers, owners and librarians about that fact, because that could end up in a total nightmare if there are really massive changes in some areas. But honestly, there is not much more to say about latest. It's in the latest, latest again, in the latest integration guide, it's pretty much well described. Let me search it. There you go. Where you can put it, you can put latest as the global wildcard. You can put latest for S4 systems as within one release. I don't care. And besides that, there's really not much more to say to latest than that. And on our end, it's really recognized as a string, so the comparison is the same as before. The only change was that the targets are sending latest if it's the real latest version. And an older one becomes a number again after a new release is implemented. That's the inheritation. And I believe this is clear now. So no rocket science at all, no logic, no fallbacks, string comparison. And sending is latest bracket real version. Clear?
So is it like a is it like a wild card?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically, it says latest. That means my content is relevant for the latest version. Update happens from 2005 to 2105. So content says I'm relevant for latest. Then at that moment in time, the system sends back latest bracket 2105 as the latest version. And the mixer says, oh, that's a content, but the content is relevant for latest. I don't care, and still shows it.
So it skips it. It says latest something, and as long as it says latest, then it's relevant.
Show it. Latest, match, show number, ignore latest, look into the bracket and show only what's fitting to the number. But if latest is set and latest is sent, it's a match and it's shown. That's all about it. Okay.
So before I could make content visible or not by setting the correct version that was configured in the catalog or in the settings or in the parameters. And now if I kind of want to avoid having to update context in producer for all of my web assistant content, I can just set the parameter to latest and then that's it.
Yeah. Because you can rely on the fact that the supported applications, if they run on the latest release, will send latest.
And how does the application know it's the latest?
And that's coded somewhere.
So that only works, latest only works for like the
So for success factors, for S4HANA, for Ariba, for the supported applications. Yeah, and they agreed on sending latest if the latest version is running.
So it's the most updated, the most current.
Yes. Yes. Exactly.
Do you use it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and for S4HANA on premise, you have to maintain it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but if it's cloud, the cloud update happens, and that's the moment in time where they say now the latest is not 2005 anymore. Since today, the latest is 2103 because we updated, so it's the latest. So they send latest with bracket 2103, not latest bracket 2105 anymore because it's not 2105 anymore. Now it's 2103. But the fact is, if you have latest in your content and the target sends latest, and the version doesn't matter, it's the latest. Not any specific, it's just the latest version.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's confusing. Yeah? In the first run, because you think there must be some magic. There's no fucking magic. It's just comparing latest against latest. That's all about it.
Okay, so for maintenance, someone would have to go through, show me all that have latest,
exactly.
And if it's not valid anymore, have to set a specific version.
And if you play with it and you see at the day of an update, compare, and then you can use the console again and check the versions just by using web assistant get version and stuff, and then you see the connection of both, and you see what happens and what doesn't. And I believe this is all about what your question was in Gem. Yeah, that's really straightforward. This is no magic at all, no logic, no business logic, no nothing. It's just saying latest, okay, then I show it. Not more than that.
Okay, could also be star or
it could be Peter again. Yeah, let's call it Peter. Doesn't matter. Yeah, Peter bracket 5, whatever.
Okay.
Good. So versions and UIs. No, let's skip that. You know about this blah 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 stuff about robustness and unrobustness. Important is still that we got selectors, coming back to the selectors that we indicated on object level, which are per definition somehow darker than the others. Yeah, there's a little difference here, which is super important. I just want to emphasize on it again, without going into details. The fact that this is related to the selector, or AKA recognition rule, used for that particular object. In here, that's field glass. You see that one is dark green and there is no little flag in front. And that says FG field glass stable ID selector. That means this part of the UI comes with a known ID that, based on that FG field glass specific selector, was created and to provide uniqueness. Again, projecting this into the future, that might be something that we have to investigate for unknown applications. What objects or how objects are marked, so which properties code-wise of the objects are unique enough to create such a selector for, to define, yes, this is good quality. This, I can rely on that. That's what the dark green one says. Yes, this is super unique. If you tag something to it, it will work in a couple of weeks still. And the other green one is still robust and still unique, but, and there you see what it does, it's using texts as a selector. That means this object is called good. And the text selector says, okay, as long as it's good, as long as the string in here is good, I will find it again. But I believe, since it's text, this is where the flag is in, it's language dependent. Because if the user interface language switches from English to French, good would be bon, which is not good, which is not matching, which leads to the fact that the selector that just looks into the anchor tag, this is how to read the bottom line, for some text is good, and then a number is wildcarded per default. So this is the recognition rule for the text selector, making this become language dependent, while this is saying that the div, so the complete area on the screen, has a certain ID, which is SOW-container, which is on the allow list to be considered as a super robust ID within that particular page. Okay. So always keep in mind there are two greens, and they are super independent, so super different from each other. Yeah, they are all robust, but this guy will work in the user interface language the content was created only, while this guy will be presented in any user interface language in the same way. So if one of those is made in English, it will be visible anywhere unless it's translated to the currently used user interface language. Yeah? While this one will only be visible in the target language, but not based on the language filter. It doesn't care about the language filter. The fallback, the hard-coded fallback will still be English, but good will not be good anymore in French, it will be bon. So it will not match. So it will not even find it. Yeah? So it has nothing to do with each other anymore. I just want to make sure that you got this comparison, because this is, for now, it's not that important. It's good for you to understand it, but it's not that important because we don't adjust those selectors, those recognition rules. As soon as we talk about getting third-party implementations up and running, for sure, we will have to have a closer look to this, because then we will have to modify them in certain occasions. But this is again something that I wanted to be considered as an outlook. I just want to make clear, okay, this is how it works, because this is the bottom line of our boot, of our functional flow. So at the end, it's all about the object. And there's where the magic is, and this is where we're gonna go into in detail in the next session as soon as we have the official documentation and everything in hand. Besides that, let me show you the text selector, just to show you that this is not rocket science, basically. That's the text selector. And even without, I'm not speaking JavaScript that much, but nevertheless, you see what it does. It gets the element and gets the selector based on certain allow and block commands. It says if something is applied, ignore it. And if something is some attribute of the target is the case, then allow it to be used, and if not, block it based on those particular HTML information. So, and what it effectively does is reading the text portion of a certain anchor, of a certain hyperlink, and puts it as the actual element attribute into our forms and make the object recognized based on that. Not more, not less. This is pretty much straightforward. Again, this is I'm not a coder myself. So, but this is usually this is readable. And just to give you an idea, this is the ID selector. That's a complete different story. That just says, hey, get the idea. And put it as a, if ID is robust, put it in, no rules. If it has an ID, use it, period. That's the ID selector. So, and then there are overall rules that are prioritizing certain selectors in comparison with each other. But that was just meant as an outlook again, where this is coming from, that decision, which one matches. And there is a weighting in there, a percentage of weighting. If two match, use the one with the better weighting. So that's the same as we did it in Desktop Assistant, basically. But that's what the color indication is about, and that's, as an outlook, is what we're going to go into more details in the next session, where we talk about third-party integration in general. So selectors, and then we come to the parameters, and this is where we now crawl through the most important ones. If you want me to try them, we can put them into the URL and see what they do. But I just want to make sure, using the last couple of minutes, to really understand the single parameters. Yeah, but first of all, last time the question, do we all understand where those parameters come from? Do we all understand what the difference is between the injection approach and the configuration approach? Do we all understand why it's so crazy to compare the single configurations, because they are owned by the target, not owned by us, but they are all doing the same basically. And the way is always about those parameters. They define how web assistant is working. Are we good with that now?
Yes.
Considering, very good. Okay, then let's talk parameters. The first, the one and only service layer version is the most important one still. Yeah, because that defines the general working scenario of web assistant. I'm always jumping between here and here. This one is my, I had a filled one. Where's this? Let me just clean up a bit. I'm confused in my own tab nightmare here. So let's leave this aside. This is the change, right? This is extensibility. This is custom only. And this is the way. So the service layer version defines the 3 possible web assistant configuration scenarios, which is UACP, the famous user blah blah platform. Again, when content is loaded exclusively from there as standard content. WPB, nowadays replaceable by SEN, makes sense, right? So wherever you find WPB, I just realized that when I looked at the update of the link generator that SEN is now in. Yeah, so it's just the other namespace, but it's the same. Content is loaded from a manager. Custom content only scenario. And Ext is the extensibility scenario where all 3 servers are involved. One is inheriting to the other. And that one has one specific, which is the fact, that's your second part of your question, Carol, requires the additional parameter read-only model, RO model equals WPB. And don't ask me why. Only accept it as a must be, because that doesn't do anything anymore. It just was implemented that way, but because it did something another day, yeah, and it's still necessary for extensibility. I don't know what technically is behind that thing. We just know Ext needs RO model equals WPB in the config. Represented here, because there you see, if it's said, help layers Ext against UACP, but for manager backends, it comes with the RO model, and now not WPB, but SEN. Yeah? And honestly, really, I have no idea what it does, but it must be there. Yeah? And there is no modification necessary, but if you do it wrong, if you put Peter in here, our model, that Peter extensibility doesn't work. Yeah, so just consider it as a must-have switch that is a black box, and we don't care. Fact is, for Ext, it must be set, yeah, for that particular scenario.
I never set that in the S4 catalog.
There it's set by the system,
okay.
I believe, or in that case, it's not needed. Yeah, but there it is always like, oh, our model was not set, and the ask back is always, what does our model do? And everybody just says, I have no clue, but you need it. Yeah, so better set it. one obstacle less. Yeah, for Ext, you said it. Good. So let's go through. UACP uses this one only, no others involved. WPB using this one only.
So
and
UACP
take care.
Would also mean only context help and guided tours.
Context help and guided tours. Yeah, and if the learning content server is another parameter. The learning content server is learning all learning app or all LA related parameters. This is fully independent from the rest. Yeah, so in standard content scenario, you can also configure learning content, but you have to activate it. We come to that in a second. For now, we talk about in-app help only and content only, And now in Ext, we talk about both if you connected and extended the learning content. If you want to not take, if you don't want to take learning content into consideration, this is still an extensibility scenario. In that case, there is no connection and no extension, and Learning Center is not configured. Yeah, then you would have this box not in the game, but it would still be the same scenario. Yeah? We need to understand they are different sources, different technologies, and also from a parameterization perspective, they are not connected to each other. They are fully independent. Okay.
So I could do UACP, have the standard context help, and consider my Learning Center to be my client's manager.
Exactly. And then we come to the second part of your question from Jem. Toggling between those scenarios is no problem at all. The only thing that you have to know is that the custom content scenario, when service layer version is set to WPB or nowadays SEN, looking to the data URL WPB, while extensibility is looking to the data URL WPB2. Yeah, it's again a little sadistic.
Oh.
Yeah, that's the only change. Yeah, that was the reason for your misunderstanding. Yeah? It's using different follow-up parameters. So next page, there is a dependency on the scenario on which of those content source URLs to use. For all the scenarios, it's data URL WPB, but not for the extended scenario. In that case, it's called data URL WPB2. Another reason why it makes sense to use the link generator to create links for trial purposes, because you don't have to take care about that shit anymore. But in fact, that's the #1 misunderstanding, simply because these guys are different. That's the case, and that leads to confusion, because if you only toggle the scenario and you have data URL WPB configured, the extended scenario will not find its way because it's looking for another parameter to find its way. It's all about to say. Yeah, 2 parameters. One is exclusive for extended. One is used for the standard scenarios and the content, the custom only scenario only. Yeah, and that's definitely the reason why you've been confused, just because they are different. And this is just a little tiny number. Yeah, also something like the RO model, and then we are done. The rest makes sense. Yeah, but this is the 2 areas that, for me personally, make not that much sense. Which you just have to know it.
Okay. Yeah, and so does that also? I have to read the question afterwards. Yeah. Okay. So that is slap in the face.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it is that it is. Period. Yeah. No. I don't even get the the reason behind. It's just as it is. Good. Going ahead. SAML, shall Web Assistant authenticate using SAML or not? I used false only once, where they wanted to use it in an authenticated way, but there was no SAML provider yet. What happens then if help dash SAML? Always keep in mind, I didn't put that to the slides explicitly. This is the parameter's name. If you put it to the URL, it's always help dash and then the parameter. No? I'm only mentioning the parameters here. I'm skipping the help dash in front. So SAML, yes. Single sign-on, yes or no. If SAML is false, what happens? Target application starts. Login form is presented in an iframe, which means you have to log on manually to the help system, which no one on the planet will ever do. Yeah. So it's a fallback. It's a workaround for times being as soon as we got single sign-on implemented, stuff like that. But it would not be anything that you would do in a practical scenario. In this context, far more important is new window SAML. New window SAML toggles between the SAML authentication happening in an iframe. That's the way that it is, for instance, here. Let me just close this and reload it. So I'm authenticating against the target with a manual form. Then Bootstrap is starting, help4.js is loaded, content is requested. At that moment in time, authentication takes place. Yeah, and that was, you probably haven't seen it in the share. Right? There's a little iframe popping up. Yeah, and doing the authentication in line and then closing itself again. That's the best possible scenario. Yeah? But now Web Assistant knows it's me, while SuccessFactors always pretends that I'm Anaya Xing, the admin. Yeah? So, but if you're, and that's then the important part, if your SAML provider that does not allow, either based on configuration or in general, that SAML authentication is happening in iframes, and some consider that as a security risk, for instance, Azure AD or Okta. Okta, not anymore in the current release, I believe, but this, Mercha is the guy to ask in case. Yeah, but that's a known one. And if something fails with the authentication, it's always a good choice just to add it with true. And if it works, then add it to the config. Yeah, it's always about, is the SAML authentication allowed in an iframe or is it not? And if it's not, you set it to true, and then the authentication will happen in a new window. In that case, the only thing that can fall on your feet is the fact that your browser is set, configured in a way that disallows pop-ups in any case. In that case, the prerequisite would be a group policy change for the corresponding server to allow pop-ups to make both possible. Yeah, so this is like a chain of events, but you know now, if you haven't known before, that's for some identity providers, that's the solution for most of the issues.
For my specific customer, they have SAML authentication, so they have an ADFS,
yeah.
but they don't have single sign-on. So the ADFS will always ask for, okay, who are you?
Yeah.
Before issuing a SAML ticket. So probably I will have to set new Windows SAML there too.
If you don't want to overlay your target application with that question, yes. Yeah, but this is a scenario from my personal point of view that makes no sense. Yeah, if you will have to authenticate manually against the help system, no one will use it, period. Yeah, why would you do that? I would be very careful in those scenarios and say, guys, this makes no sense. Yeah, because if you are authenticated against the target already, why would you? In worst case, you have to invent another username for that purpose. Yeah, you're out of the game. That makes no sense. Okay, guys, we need to hurry a bit. Disable manual logon. If the SAML provider is there and configured, but the single user would not be able to authenticate for whatever reason. If the SAML provider is down, failure, update, whatever, maintenance, or if you have two different user groups, one shall be allowed to use enable now, one shall be not. Disable manual login is your weapon of choice. And there is a prerequisite. The no help mode needs to set to a certain parameter. We come to that in a second. But here, if this is set to true, and if a SAML authentication won't be possible, the authentication request window, whether it's a form or just a pop-up, will be closed automatically. And then one of the two scenarios in the bottom will happen. If standard content scenario and is configured as extended, it falls back to standard and will not show it. That's a cool one, because then you can say the authenticated ones, let's say the HR people, they see more than the normal guys. That's one option to do so. It's a bit of a hack, but it still works. And if it's custom content only scenario, the complete help button disappears, which is cool. Saying, okay, I can't authenticate you, no help system for you, but for the others. And but it's restricted to the custom content only scenario is our current answer. If the question is, okay, we are using external workforce, what could we do? Then we have to create a role that prevents the authentication via XAML to that particular target application, which then will lead to the fact that the help system will not be offered for externals, but for internals, let's say. Yeah, so this is quite an interesting one that you have to know. It's not self-explaining. What disable manual logon would say, I cannot log on manually, but there is some more behind, as discussed. Central configuration editor, you know editor and what it does. Just to have it mentioned again, it's not really wise to set editor true to the config. In productive scenarios, I would rather advise the authors to edit manually to the URL or bookmark a URL with editor equals true to their bookmarks. Otherwise, you would always have XAML requests that are not counted and it had to check and stuff. So not do that productively. Right to left, left to right, you know. Wait a second. Not much more to say. Right to left mode is activated. In some cases and in some environments, this leads to trouble because the target is not sending. So the RTL information needs to be sent from the target, and it's actually also not only an initialization parameter, it's also a runtime parameter. So it can be changed in runtime. Obviously, if you change your language from English to Arabic, everything changes in runtime. So a web assistant must attach to the other side as well and change its layout. Language parameter, the language code is set to sets the web assistant UI and content language for filtering tests. This can be easily changed by yourself. Keep in mind that it plays together with SAP-language if supported, especially for S/4HANA and for Fiori Launchpads. Everything that is running on UI5, basically, the SAP-language parameter sets the language of the target, while help-language, our parameter, sets the language of the help system. What benefit would that have? You can test and present in workshops the fallback behavior to the customer, because you can make the UI language in runtime change independent from the help system's language. Just to have in mind. So it's help-language is our language, the header language and the content filter, while SAP language is the language of the target application. And if language, our language, help-language is not set, SAP language triggers help language, which is the normal case for end users, which make total sense. But if you want to make them independent from each other for testing and presentation purposes, this is the way to go. Info bar, the guy that says something on the bottom, has a certain timeout, as you know, which can be configured. And the info bar what's new timeout, since a while, can be configured independent from the regular one, which is good. This is just the information. What's new infos stay for 10 default, while others like save successful are only staying for 3. If you want this to be changed, this is how to do it. This is an important one again. Open immediately triggers the help panel to be initialized automatically as soon as the initialization takes place. Full means fully outfolded. Minimized means in a minimized way. Minimized, fully folded out is full and minimized. Null would mean on initial, and that's the default value. On initialization, it's behaving like this, doing nothing. Going back, in this particular case, only if this is default or explicitly set to null, you can use the read catalog property. And that's an important one, again, because it's not obvious what it does, but it's a very, very important one from a technical perspective. And that if it's true, the catalog request is not submitted to the content source at that moment in time where the application initializes. If read catalog is set to true, the catalog request, the request for the content, happens as soon as the end user is activating the help system once. Okay? And obviously, it makes no sense if any open immediately option is set, because then it's visible and then it needs content. Yeah? This is also one of the top 5. Yeah? We want to reduce our bandwidth consumption and we don't want to initialize, but it's still not working. We set read catalog to true. Do you open it immediately? Yes, for sure. We want the people to use it. Do you get the message? Yeah? Okay. This is not. It simply makes no sense. Yeah, obviously not. Minimize, minimize. Switch on and off. Close, close. Switch on and off. Not more to say. Short description on and off. Question of style. Do you want the tiles description being displayed, or you want them as a crisp list to save space? That's the parameter. And the carousel top space, very important to know, and also important to know that it comes with a certain bandwidth between 24 and 80 pixels, is the area where the side panel starts. Yeah? Because in some applications, especially in custom launchpads, it can happen that based on the configuration of the target again, the header space is somehow modified. Yeah? And then you have partly overlaying the side panel and potentially important header information or functions. And that's what this is for. Yeah? This just creates an intent where the sidebar is starting. For now, it's only relevant for custom launchpads, actually, where such differences could be made. This is also one that we're going to take into consideration and have a closer look to in the next session as soon as we start talking about third-party integration. Yeah, because there you have to check and see and adjust it to the target's preferences. This is also, again, a very important one. No help mode, what does this do? If there is no help, how shall, so if the catalog request was sent and the catalog comes back empty, yeah, I have no help for you here. What should the behavior be? And that depends a bit on the rest of the configuration. For instance, if you have search active and you have the learning center in place and you have community links in place, you would not hide the help panel because there's still functionality in there. The links to the static things like the help center and the community, right? If you don't have those configured and you have no help for a certain context, it could be the customer's decision to say, hide the button. Yeah. So if there is no content, I don't want this button just to open it to then realize that there's nothing. I actually want to prevent that. In that case, you would set it to hide button. Okay. So no help mode has quite an impact. This is an acceptance relevant parameter, so you have to know about it. We come back to it in a second. Auto start guided tour. It's help dash auto start tour, and then the ID of the guided tour, which will lead to the fact that this guided tour is started without having to pick it actively from the side panel. So what is this for? For welcome tours in most of the cases and for what's new tours in most of the cases. But how could we attach it? Because it can't be initialized, right? You can initialize that one big welcome tour for everybody, but usually you want those specific, like I'm entering the portal for finance people the first time, and then I get the what's new tour for finance people. So what you have to do is you have to modify the links pointing to this. Yeah? You have to put this to the deep links, which are pointing to that particular one. Just showing you an example where this is solved exactly in that way, if I find it, which is the Launchpad example. Let me. Oh, no, this was it. It was just in the wrong mode. There we go. Going back to here. So the regular trial ones, and if you go back to that no. Guys. There is one layer above. I don't want to destroy my case here. There's, if you open your trial, there is the scenario selection screen where you say, I want to pretend being a project manager. I want to pretend being a general ledger accountant or whatever. Yeah, and those are, it's a launchpad as well, but it has deep links to specific launchpads. And this is the scenario that I wanted to mention, but I believe this is clear. Yeah, so if you have a level in between, you can run specific guided tours based on specific targets, but only if you are able to adjust the link that points to there. There's no other option. So learning app, as mentioned, fully independent from the rest. Either it's there or not. The learning app backend URL is the one where the learning content can come from, and it can be configured fully independent from the others. URL and workspace play together. Yeah, no URL without workspace. Don't ask me why this is not put into one parameter. It's two. So it's the manager URL and the work area ID, independent from each other. And that parameters together define where the learning content is coming from. Yeah. Even in an extensibility scenario, you could point to a not mirrored work area and use learning content only from your tenant, while the UACP content, if edited, is mirrored to another work area. Yeah, so it's fully free and fully independent from each other. That's the important learning here. Learning community is what's behind that link. It was originally made to support jam groups. Could be any other. Could be a forum in SharePoint. Could be any link. LA, learning app feedback. The feedback tile on the particular learning object, pointing to the author of it, either active or not. It's just a functional toggle. And then the learning center URL is the one that's behind the learning center button for cases where no content is available. That's the only jump out. Or if content is available, is the first in the list, learning center, which could point to a learning center, which could also point to anything else. It could point to an external page, to Intranet, to a SharePoint site, or to a published library for sure, which is my preferred one. Just to don't have this crazy tile-based view, but rather go to a library and have a structured view. But that's a question of taste. But that can be set independent, basically, from all the other URLs. If it's not set, the learning backend URL is taken, and the content from here is presented as a learning center. This is an override that says, don't use the standard behavior. I want something different here, but still the same button. Yeah, don't get that wrong.
But I can still have my book pages and my projects from the learning app.
Yes, no
URL.
difference. Fully independent. As soon as set, the only thing that changes is that this points to somewhere else.
Okay.
Learning app project mode, still a pity, but yeah, that's it. This is, and our English word Übung for practice is still in there. At least it's consequent. So you need to know practice is German in our world since ever, and it's not practice but Übung, which is practice mode, which is the default. Yeah, that's one of the first things I'm usually doing in custom projects. Setting this to demo. Because I don't know where this decision comes from, that the default is an interactive one for a help system. But I personally think that this is a wrong decision and it should be in presentative mode. However, this is how to change it. Learning app project mode is for learning app, for the learning app. This is another reason why I personally prefer putting this to a library, because there you don't have to choose. You can use it as the library is configured. But again, that's a question of taste. So generic integration ones, and the resource URL. The resource URL is the one where the help for JS and the additional defaults like the CSSs and the fonts come from. So this is the source of the framework, right? And usually you don't touch it, except you are in an isolated network and you have to change it because you want it to run from their premises only without talking to the internet. And there, Anton bravely created a cool blog that explains that from A to Z, which is linked here. Read it in case you face that issue for the first time. In 90% of the cases, the framework and all the resources would come from the central server in the cloud, except the customer actively wants you to prevent any server-to-server communication through the internet. In that case, this is applicable, and there, from my personal point of view, Anton's blog is the best choice because it's a proper documentation, crisp and complete and comprehensive. Thanks, Anton, for that.
To the chat?
Pardon me?
Can you paste it to the chat?
Absolutely. And I told you that we will have enough time for question and answers. I'm so sorry. But there were discussions. Mr. Mavrin provided this. There we go. Yeah, so, but we are close. Let's just toggle back quickly. So resource URL, that's only for that purpose. In normal cases, you would not touch it. And in all of the implemented cases, for sure, it's set by the target. That's again, some alien one, use global help. Yeah. That was meant as a workaround. If you have launchpads that incorporate SAP GUI for HTML transactions and old WebDyn pros into a launchpad. Yeah, those technologies, SAP GUI for HTML and also WebDyn Pro, will never support Web Assistant on a expected level. Yeah? No objects, not that much pages, nothing. But it's a common case. Yeah? Customer is creating a launchpad. Launchpad points to something which still uses older technologies, like an old CRM. So what could we do in that case? In that case, we use for launchpads, meaning for S/4HANA systems or for custom launchpads on cloud platform. We use the parameter use global help, which is set to true, which then gives you that one in case the Web Assistant realizes that the currently applicable context is a SAP GUI for HTML page or a WebDyn Pro page. And what it offers is this, and this points to a standard piece of content that is again in the internet somewhere, that just gives you an idea of how to access the standard pull helps in those systems. Like the help menu, help, and in WebDyn Pro also the regular help. It just explains where the helps are in those scenarios. From my personal point of view and to my taste, this confuses more than it helps. And it's not possible to make this link point to something else than the standard content for now. Yeah? There's also a change request pending. Have a look at it. It's hard to simulate. I tried because it's a bit hard to understand, but I couldn't find an example system for that purpose. Unfortunately not. However, you know about it. I personally would not really recommend to use it, honestly speaking. Hyphenation, okay, yeah. In some systems, auto hyphenation is possible, which saves you some space. Yeah? And there is a minimum UI5 version of 1.6 required because UI5 framework after version 1.6 supports hyphenation. Okay, yeah, you know about it. It wasn't in the document so far. This is why I added it here. So, and then we got finally the features, and there is only a multi-page and multi-page timeout to be discussed. It's also more meant as an outlook, because with multi-page true and false, you can trigger the Web Assistant's reload and reinitialization on page change if set to false. So it just behaves a bit like it reinitializes each time a page changes. This is meant to be the case for applications where there is older web apps, where the pages are basically own HTML containers with no overall logic. But in most of the cases and set by all of the so far implemented target applications, this is set to true. That means process, and that's basically from your perspective, the end result, process spanning or page spanning guided tours are possible because it's not reloading. I just want to explain it because this one might be interesting, the multi-page timeout. And that means the web assistant in-memory data that says I'm on step 5 of that guided tour, right? And now I want to proceed on step 6 if the context applies, is kept in the browser's memory space. If multi-page is true, which is the case for all of the so far supported applications. But one that you might want to modify is the timeout, yeah, which is a value in seconds. 300 is a lot. At that moment in time, that multi-page memory dump times out, and then the next page change will effectively be something like a reinitialization. Yeah? And for whatever reason, you might want to reduce that value, increase that value, but now you know that this is only for the purpose, okay, I want this timeout, this memory cache of where am I right now and what's my content being kept alive for X time and then reinitialized after. And it only counts if multi-page is true, which is the case in most of the cases. And probably as soon as we are in the third-party world, we will find occasions where it has to be a non-multi-page approach. In that case, the timeout makes no sense. What's new and what's new exploration and direct should explain themselves. Actively, you only have to know about the date format that we are using. It's the US American one. For expiration dates. For timeouts, this is also one that I'm usually trying to put into the URL rather than into the init to avoid having to touch the init with each release if it's custom content. And then that's the last slide. If you have customers, I have none, using or trying to use Web Assistant on phones, there was a latest change in the latest S/4HANA release where we don't have help-mobile true as the only one anymore, but also help -activate phone is true. If you only use mobile is true, still on mobiles, the question mark won't appear. This is consistency reason because before in S/4HANA, there was also only mobile true or false for all the mobile end devices. And then there was a reasonable reason why you have to distinguish between tablets and phones. And this is why phone was additionally implemented to be able to do so. And we had to follow this. That's the reason. So if you have active implementations where you have mobile active for this case, now you have to add another parameter to it. And let me just show you how that looks like. This is the regular Launchpad, right? So, and that supports phone because it's our trial. So I'm now opening my console again. And I know, don't know if you know that switch. That's cool. This is here. This toggles between phone and that is a toggle between, now the browser is emulating a phone. And that's quite handy for those purposes. And now as it is set, you see component.js is loaded, our stuff is loaded, and inside the little guy, we're gonna find help. And now you see why it doesn't make that much sense in most of the cases, simply because it's, I mean, it's an either or decision. I want to use the system or you want to use the help, which is more or less senseless. It works, but it's a questionable use case. Here an outlook to the roadmap sooner or later, again, always not knowing when, we will have sidebar independent in-app help objects like those, but independent from the existence of the sidebar, which then will make in-app help usable on phones a little better than they are right now. But this is what you know. This is a little trick that I wanted to show you because sometimes it's hard to test those scenarios. And this is what you have to do since the latest S4 release 2020. We talked about the themes already. Here's the technical values for your reference because the high contrast ones are have abbreviations if you want to play with them. The custom text style set to true gives you the option to use text styles coming from the adaptable resources of your attached work area instead of the default ones. Yeah, that's well documented in the manual, so I believe we don't have to go into deep here. And then we have those crazy ones. I added them to the deck simply because you see which color is actually affected by what property. Yeah, they look a bit like weird American football play moves, but I believe you get an idea. There's 2 of them, yeah, just for your reference, to see which of the parameters is actually applied to what. This is just a little helper, and that was it, guys. I hope it was helpful. I don't want to cut you off immediately. So in case there are open questions and you have a bit more time, let's talk about it. As always, appreciate your feedback.
Very good. Thank you. I have one question left.
Go ahead.
So when you have the extensibility scenario on,
Yes,
the custom content is connected from the SAP, the standard content is connected from the SAP server. I have extended into my work area. So I have the normal, after the hashtag shell home already in my work area. And if I now create custom content, it will be shell home bracket extension bracket. Now, if my client decides to get rid of the standard content because it makes no sense, I then end up in my manager with all my shell home bracket extension bracket, which the web assistant is now ignoring because
WPB, WPB2.
Okay, so the extension is
a string, not more. The extension is not affecting the content. Yeah? Everything is in and it will work.
Okay, so it's shell home, and no matter what comes behind, if I use the WPB work, the one with the...
If you move from ext to standard content only, your service layer changes from ext to WPB/SEN nowadays. And then it will not take the data URL into consideration anymore, data URL2 into consideration anymore, but you have to configure data URL. And if this points to, and if this points to the same work area, only the fact that those things are called bracket extension will not lead to nothing. It will still work. It will not inherit anymore the content from the standard, for sure. Because the extended ones, they have placeholders for all the objects that are coming from UACP, and it's only keeping them physical into that project where you did modifications or where you added something. If you it's gone. It's empty. The reference goes to nothing.
Yeah,
that's the only side effect. Yeah, but everything that you maintained will stay.
So I don't need to erase the bracket extension.
No, that's just a part of the title for maintenance purposes. But it's not part of the context. As soon as something becomes part of the context, it's relevant. The title is never relevant. Title is just a title.
So the issue was that the data URL WPB, I didn't change that one. Got it.
And potentially the RO model thingy that you have to sometimes use and sometimes not. I believe this is next release is gone. Yeah, they sometimes, if you need it, if you have an extension and you set it, you have to set it, otherwise it doesn't work. And if you switch to another scenario that doesn't require it and you have it set, it probably does strange things, but no one knows what. Yeah? So just know, only for ext we need our RO model WPV. For any other we don't. If you change, you take it out. That's one more reason why using the link generator makes a lot of sense, because it does that for you.
So my project could be called Peter, as long as it has the context. Cool.
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 Okie dokie, ladies and gentlemen, friends of performance support. I wish you a great weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Take care. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, Mike. Bye-bye. Very good.
Mike, do you have another session today?
Yes.